Thank you, Sean. Good evening, folks. Welcome to our budget hearing, joint budget session with our fiscal committee. I am going to call this meeting to order, and if I can get a motion to approve the agenda, we can get started.
I'll hear you, Margaret.
Is there a second?
Second?
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Perfect. Do we have any member comments? I don't think we have anybody in person. If there's anybody calling in or coming into Zoom, Larry or Chris? Do you have anyone? Everyone? No member comments? Okay. Hearing no member comments, we're ready to move into the agenda. And I'm assuming we have no members for the public hearing as well? No comments? Okay, hearing none, I will turn it over to our treasurer, Bob Petrine, but I want to take a quick minute to introduce our stand-in chair for fiscal today, Dave Kerr. Thank you for graciously accepting that. If you want to introduce your committee, please go for it.
Sure. With us tonight, Ken Adams from Fiscal, Mike Gears, and we have, of course, Tom Deal is part of our fiscal committee, who's the Director of Finance here. We also hopefully have some members online tonight, which
I see Lisa.
I think Mike has helped us get a hold of. We're going to get a few people there, so I'm not sure who's on, but
Perfect.
hopefully they're on.
Thank you, Dave. And off to you, Bob, to go into.
If Chris, you could make me co-host, then I could begin. Is there some way to
Turn off your mic so that. Is your computer microphone on?
Yes,
Can you turn it?
it's on.
It shouldn't be.
Okay. Can we get rid of that?
Can you hit cancel on that box? Or we're stuck.
Won't happen again. I will have every staff here needed to run all this crap.
August is tough all around.
Larry, do you want to introduce your staff while we're waiting, since you've got a full house here? A lot of them will show up.
Sure.
Would you like me to start, Mr. Butler?
No, that's great.
I'm Lauren Kowalski, the Director of Recreation and Environmental Education.
I'm Gil, Director of Finance. Christian, the Director of Capital Projects.
Superman today.
Dave Merrick, Senior Program Manager of Parks and Rec.
Sam Finner, Director of HR.
King Madam Director.
Can you control?
Austin, Capital Projects.
One who's different. Yeah. We should have had you like share a personal story.
I know.
Icebreaker.
One time in band camp.
Don't start.
I have a good cake story here.
So for any members that ask future questions about why are we doing Zoom meetings, when will in-person happen? Not anytime soon.
When are you thinking about going back in person?
When we figure out technology?
September.
There we go.
Once everybody on the board has had COVID, then it makes it easy.
I'm not volunteering.
Are you the virgin in the group?
Yeah.
I apparently am, I
Bob,
don't know.
you've been good.
Oh,
Yeah.
Bob and Irwin?
Bob and
Yeah.
Irwin.
Yeah. I don't think I've had it.
I had to go to Alaska to get cold.
So you were brought it back.
Not the comfort of your own home.
No, on a 100-person boat where we got quarantined from Canada. That was. All right, this is the best start meeting of mine.
Okay, there we go.
Okay, here we go.
Okay,
Go down to Bob.
my- I'm Bob Petrine, Treasurer of Reston Association, and I've met, at least in passing, most of you in the room. The intent of our session tonight is not to make decisions. We're not going to try to focus on the individual numbers as we have in past sessions. What I'd like to do is focus on three elements of any budget, but particularly RA's budget: the income side, expenses, and capital spending. And what I'd like to do, what I've done is sat down and posed to myself, if I were in your position, what questions would I be asking, or what questions might members ask about the various elements, so that when you begin to think about how you're going to, when you put together a budget, how it's going to represent the needs and wants of our membership. Can you hear me now? Yes. Great. Sorry about that. So what I'm going to first do is pose several questions on each of the components. The second thing is provide some observations and discussion questions on each. And then third, I want to get your input. Determine what additional information, what direction, not only the board, but what you as staff want to follow as we put together the 2023 budget. I know this is the second year of a biennial budget, but we spend as much time each year on each of the budgets as if we just did a budget on an annual basis. So let's go on to the first set of questions. And the first one is on the income questions, or if you go back one slide, Chris. Okay. What are the costs? What costs do the assessments cover? What services and amenities are members willing to pay for? And how are we going to determine what their wants are? The third is, which is really on your side, on the staff side, is what new programs are proposed? And have we put together, when I was studying for an MBA, the best course I took was a course on marketing. And my professor, Professor Ellen Sari, required us to do all of our marketing studies on one side of one piece of paper. He said, if you couldn't explain your program on one sheet of paper, you really didn't understand what you were doing, and you should go back and modify. The next question is, should RA impose provisions or sunset provisions on programs and services so that everything gets reviewed periodically? You know, are we meeting objectives? What are our costs? How are they increasing? How are they changing? How are the members interacting with us? And then a subset or a sub-question on that is, what limitations do we face to do this kind of an exercise? So now that my slide flipper is moved. So this slide looks at the last 23 years of assessments. The blue line, which is pretty hard to see, is upward sloping from left to right. And in 2000, the assessment was $340 a year. This year, it's $740, which represents on average a 3.2% increase year over year. The orange line, which is much more, excitable, shall we say, represents the year over year change from one year to the next. It is
Percentage change.
Change in what?
just percentage change. And so what's interesting about this, at least, is that at the same time we've seen the assessments increase, membership really has been quite stable because Reston's been built out since the late 90s. And the new, most of the, I shouldn't say all, but most of the new construction, the new development, as it exists right now, is in the TSA, which is not required to be part, which is, number one, it's not part of the PRC, and secondly, is not required to be a Reston Association member. Although the current comp plan suggests that it would be a good idea for continuity that these developments join RA, it's not a requirement. And we have,
Get into that.
okay, if we go on to the next slide. What I've done here is taken a slide that was first, a relationship that was first in the annual report about 2 or 3 years ago. And what this is doing is looking at the net percentages of how each dollar of each assessment dollar is used. And as you can see here, on the left chart, the greatest preponderance is what I refer to as overhead, but overhead is administration. It's basically the costs you incur just to have an organization and operate it without doing anything. And the other major component are the additions that we have to add to the reserves. So we can go on to the next slide. This is, I borrowed an analysis that Laura did in her presentation, which she'll explain more of in a few minutes. But this is an analysis of rec passes for the past 4 years, which was assembled by Laura, and which you'll speak to later in the session. Go on to the next slide. What I've done with this slide is I've taken the data and made a couple of observations and follow on questions as they relate to budgeting for 2023 and future years. So first observation, and this has been borne out over the last 10 plus years, fewer members are using our pools. In 2010, we had over 200,000 uses for free swims, and this is based on the data that we have. It's right now about 100,000. We still have the same 15 pools. We still have 62,000 people that live here in Reston. It kind of begs the question, what about the pools should we be aware of? The composition of past revenue has changed from 75-25, and we're just looking at the last 3 or 4 years. 75% member-generated revenue, 25% non-member, to 65-35. Change in composition is important because we're expecting non-members to pick up a greater proportion of our operating expenses. And total revenue is below, at least as of the middle, I believe Laura did this as of July 20th or thereabouts. At that point, where we're still below revenue for 2019. Non-members account for a little over 4% of past purchases, up from 2.4% in 2019. And there's the big pickup has been in pickleball, and I think that for 2 reasons. Number one, we're capturing the information now that we weren't before. And number two, it is, by all popular press, one of the most explosive recreational activities that the average person is participating in. So what it did to me was generate a couple of questions, which we can talk about. What should RA do to promote the use of its pools and racket courts? Secondly, can or should RA rely on non-members to cover an increased proportion of operating expenses and maintaining the pools and racket courts? And lastly, does it make sense to upgrade the facilities if members' usage continues to decline? So if we maintain the pools as they are, that has a certain cost, but if we go, as we are going to do, as we have begun to do with Lake Thoreau, and significantly improve it, we're talking a capital expenditure in the $3.5 to $4 million range. And is that going to generate more usage? We don't know. But the last question obviously is how do we go about projecting changes? As we move to the next slide, we're going to shift to the expenses. First question that I had is because people costs consume 70+% of the operating budget, what are the proposals for staffing in 2023? This is not an indictment, this is just a fact. This is where we've spent a lot of our money. What do we need to do to hold on to people that we want to hold on to? Do we need people with different skills to do everything that we propose to do in 2023? And what is it going to cost us? The second question is 2 of the 3 key vacancies have been filled. We filled the CEO position. Sam is here as our HR director. So we have to make a decision about what to do with IT. It may be outsourced, it may continue to outsource us. And we also have in the 2022 budget, a position for the EAC director, which,
Director of Environment.
People were listening.
Acronyms.
Environmental Advisory Committee.
okay. Third question, what inflation factor is going to be applied to the service portion of the 2023 budget? Factors we've done in the past. Or are we going to identify elements which have materially diverged from CPI? And the obvious ones are gas and diesel, chemicals. I was surprised that they've jumped 72% in 2 years.
This is pool chemicals?
Pool chemicals, just chlorine. And there are a bunch of reasons for it. We'll
Yeah.
traipse over that in a few seconds. And the last is construction materials and timing of construction and the cost of construction, all those factors as we look at them. So if we slip on to the next page, these are the people. And what I've done here is taken the audited numbers from the last 6 years of audited financials and spread the people costs. What are my observations? A lot of these seem to be pretty obvious, but I think they're worth talking about. RA is a people-centric organization. People do the things that RA does. We can't substitute a computer program for many of the things y'all do. Between 2016 and 2021, people costs have averaged 71.3% of its operating budget. And what I've included in here, because they are substitutes for full-time people, are the technical and professional support that RA. If you exclude those, it drops to the mid-60s, so about 65%. RA is not a traditional hierarchical organization. There are only so many types of jobs to be done, and they're all done in Reston. So there's a physical proximity of it. You can't move people out of the area and get the jobs done. They've got to be done here. So you have to pay the labor rates that exist in Reston. You can't say, well, we're going to move those to Covington, West Virginia and pay those rates. It's not possible. Third point, many of RA staff are longtime employees. Thought should be given to succession planning. I come out of the financial institutions, out of a banking background. This is something that we thought about all the time because people would move between banks all the time. And then we should plan as well as compensation. So we should be looking at where we are today and how we get to where we want to be in the next 3 to 5 years. So I thought of, well, maybe we could, and these are just thoughts, internships, apprentice programs, part-time and contract labor for specific projects and for seasonal assignments. Those are the way other organizations deal with their cost structure. And it prepares the organization for retirements. Larry? The next slide is a real it's just a different way of representing it. I think it's very illustrative. It's the biggest box is personnel costs, and in the lower right-hand corner are professional and technical support. And you can see all the other operational expenses are in the kind of off-colored blue there in the upper right-hand corner. The next slide is, I chose this because I like the colors. I like the graphic. What it represents to me is the interdependence of globalization of our economy and the drivers of cost increases in other countries and how they impact on what we do. Big thing are just supplies, chemicals. Many of our chemicals are not made here. They're shipped from foreign sources. It is something that we have to think about. This year, it was announced yesterday that the UK's inflation rate is exceeded our own, and they are going to go into a recession as a result of Brexit, and it's going to be a long-term recession. It is not that we have a great dependence on the UK, but we do have a dependence on other countries, particularly China, its economy is slowing substantially. So the next couple of slides are just some simple observations. I didn't even know there was an Energy Information Administration in the US government, but they put out forecasts on a monthly basis. So earlier this month, they projected that energy costs have exploded in the past 2 years, led by gasoline and diesel. The EIA forecast estimates that retail gas prices will be at about $3.50 next year, but that still isn't $2. It's decreasing, it's becoming less volatile, but it still is substantially higher than it's been. Mm-hmm. The other thing that surprised me, and when you think about it, it really shouldn't surprise anybody, is electricity is being substituted, and electrical costs are increasing at an increase, but a much more stable and less volatile increase. They should increase about 2.5% in 2023 after an increase of 6.1% in 2022. Moving on to the next slide, we talked about chlorine. Chlorine, as I mentioned, has jumped 72% since 2019, and there are 3 events besides the sheer supply that have impacted it. There have been 2 fires, one in 2020 and one earlier this year, which have decreased capacity substantially. And then there's been competition for what supply was available. Private use of private pools has increased substantially. And even last year, when you looked at the non-member rec passes, there was an increase in non-members joining our pools. And that's something we should talk about, what we should be charging them based on what other people are charging their local members for pool passes. The last observation is on lumber. That's been a very volatile market. This is an index, an index graph, so it represents daily movements, and you can see they've been all over the place. They've come down recently, but it's only a matter of time before they'll spike back up. And this is largely driven by the number of new housing units that are being built and coming on board. So to move over into the last section on capital projects. And Chris will talk about this in a few minutes, where we're going next year. You know, what are the new capital acquisitions needed or planned for next year? And I emphasize needed. You know, what do we need to do? What can we maybe afford to defer? But that's for us to discuss and for you as staff to defend. Which projects are carried over from prior years will significantly impact the 2023 budget. Additions to the funds already reserved. One of the biggest projects is the Barton Hill tennis courts. There's $850,000 plus that is in the 2022 budget. It's not going to be spent this year. We will, because of the county's action, it's going to take a while to sort that out before we can move on that project, and it'll likely be next year before that gets started. Lastly, which budgeted projects could or should be deferred without any adverse impact on member experience? And I emphasize member experience. You know, what can we do that is not going to impact members, or maybe those things that would improve member experience that should be done? The last couple of slides are just, I borrowed these from a PRAC report that was done last year, and then a schedule that Laura prepared. And this just shows how old the pools are when they were last renovated as opposed to maintained. Chris and his folks really do a great job in terms of maintaining the pools. They take a lot of work, much more than the tennis courts, which are on the page following. And they're expensive, incredibly expensive. The timelines to do a complete renovation are in the 2 to 3 year time span. If you look at the tennis courts, we have, depending upon who you're talking to, 50 tennis courts or 54. So 50 tennis courts and 4 pickleball courts. They're obviously less costly to maintain and renovate than pools, but they're still significant in the $400,000 to $500,000 range, depending upon the condition. So they're definitely not cheap. Repairs generally last much longer. There are no chemicals, and there are fewer mechanical issues that you have to deal with a tennis court. And the last one, the last slide that I'd like to, direct your attention to is this was a survey that was done last year, but by a trade association on what the problems are in construction. And I took out such things as appraisals, since that was irrelevant to our situation, and kept in those that represented those issues that we face. And I think these are things that we should really focus on as we look at particularly the timing of projects. So I will stop there. I'd like to get reactions from anybody about any of the issues that are raised, or we can move on to the other presentations. But again, it was really to generate some thoughts on your part, even if you didn't like what I put together.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Dave, you know, just go ahead and.
Well, I agree with everything Bob said. No, I mean, I have lots of things that I could ask, and lots of discussion hopefully takes place. I kind of lined them up more with Laura and Chris's presentations. It might fit in there better, but keeping it a discussion on what we're doing or what we're not doing, or when we do it, as opposed to how much it costs tonight, would be a much better thing to do, okay? It's hard for the fiscal people to speak more than several words without giving a number, but we'll try our best to do that. But like I said, if we can make sure we just talk about the things we might need to do, and maybe we get into, again, Laura and Chris's stuff might help generate that discussion.
Directors, any questions? Directors on Zoom, if you can hear me, any questions? Jennifer, Glenn, and Margaret, can you guys hear us?
I can hear you. Bob, you asked a lot of questions, but we did pause throughout the presentation to answer any of the questions. Would you like us to go through and give you feedback on your questions?
Absolutely.
Is there a particular topic you'd like to start with?
Whatever is on the top of your mind.
Just going back to Bob's. You want to start from income? That was the first one of questions.
It's 2. There we go. Thank you. Go ahead, Jennifer.
I can't see what's on the side.
It says it's
You guys know.
it's the questions related to income. So what cost do the assessments cover? What services and amenities are members willing to pay for? What new programs are proposed? Should RA impose sunset provisions on programs and services so that they're subject to some review at some level of periodic review? Was there something specific that you wanted to bring up?
I would say from an overall perspective, I think we need to go into draft 1 of the budget without publicly showing that we're considering, like $100, or a very large assessment increase, because then what we tend to get back from members is, why are you guys considering this? So I'd like to get through this session and make some of those decisions so that we're not going to see a draft 1 budget with a significant assessment increase. And then the dialogue, post draft 1, I think would be more productive, in making decisions on certain projects. Going into, our already approved 2023 budget, we already have, a significant increase in the assessment, and we also already know a few costs that are increasing, like our insurance, significantly. That's just going to make that number increase even more. Also, I think we can all realize, given the labor market, that salary increases are going to be higher going into 2023 than they were even going into 2022. And as you pointed out, Bob, 70% of our budget is staff, so that's a significant number that will increase. So I guess I'm kind of wondering if we concentrate on program and service fees, and also take a hard look at the capital budget projects as part of our review tonight to help give staff some guidance on what to include in those 2 areas.
I think we have Laura and Chris lined up on those 2 topics, right? Or do you want to talk about it now?
Well, I agree with you. I agree with everything you've said because, I think the last thing that should be, that we should decide upon is the assessment. Because that is probably the single issue that members care about. How much it costs for us to operate pools is kind of irrelevant to them because it all gets wrapped up in the one number, whatever they pay, whatever the assessment fee is at the beginning of the year. But from a practical budgeting standpoint, everything that you brought up is germane. It was not my intent to get into that tonight, because I don't have the numbers, but we can talk about two of the major components. Laura's going to speak to the park and rec programs, and Chris is going to speak to capital planning, capital spending. I think that would get us at least a part of the way there.
Yeah.
And the issue of insurance is, every year we tend to get hung up by the insurance industry, which seemingly refuses to give us quotes so that we can actively shop the insurance coverages. And I think that's just the way the industry operates, but we need to focus on that issue significantly, and on a more timely basis. And so I'd like to get particularly staff's ideas on, we've heretofore, it seemed to do most of our budget exercises beginning in June through the summer, when you guys are the most busy, which seems to be perverse to me. Because usually it was, when I've done budgeting in my other lives, it's always towards the end of a year or at the beginning of a year, where you're not under the pressure of your day-to-day operations. But happy to hear what you all have to say. And
I'll start with that. Yeah, we'd love to compress it into like 1 month. It's not gonna happen. There's too many questions come forward. And, so we're gonna have draft 1 ready in September.
Okay.
The internal initial deadline is September 1st to get those numbers to Tom and Dave so they can start putting all that together. I think it's admirable and aspirational that we're gonna have 2 drafts. I hope we stick to that. I know Sarah wants to.
Yes, we are sticking to
But, so hopefully we can all
two.
work towards that. So we'll two drafts and a final.
Our timeline that we put together with Fiscal, I think it's 2.
There wasn't one in October.
It's two and then a final to vote on.
2 + 1 is 3.
2 + 1 is 3.
We're voting on the second
But
one.
the difference is 2 drafts.
Yes, 2 drafts and a final. Okay.
Because we've had years where we've had 4 drafts before the final. So
November's a draft until 11 p.m.
Yes.
So, so that's what we're working towards. So, Bob, what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna lean another one of these extra mics, because to get the audio throughout this room, I've been texting Sean, we'd have to try to restart that computer, which failed at the beginning. So, since you have the main Zoom screen there for others that wanna speak, either lean your mic right next to it, or maybe another mic at the point where they're speaking.
Okay.
We'll give that a shot.
When someone on Zoom speaks, you want to stop.
Yes.
Okay, I think no other questions. Laura's ready to go.
I'm ready.
Go
Ready?
for it.
Excited? You're
All
having
right.
so much fun? Okay, well, thanks for having me here to talk about this evening. So what we've done is, hold on, I've got my different. Okay, all right. So the purpose of this presentation is to really look at this as an education on the process. So we did use the recreation passes as the example. What I'd like to do first is walk through the process so that you understand how we are coming up with fees, not just with recreation. With the fee schedule that you saw, majority of that is related to recreation, so that's why I'm standing here. But there are other people in the room that can answer questions about different departments. So in its simplest terms, what we do is we review our sales metrics, we benchmark, we consider any changes to the operating expense before we set the fees. So the very first thing we're going to do is take a look at the sales metrics. So, sorry, I've got managing a couple screens here, so my apologies for a second. Okay, so for all of our activities, we call them activities, but these could be programs, events, rentals, and services.
Hold on.
How's that, Director Perry? Is that better?
I can confirm that. You are on, you're live. It will pick up, Laura.
Okay, I'll try that.
I couldn't hear what that was.
What was it?
I agree, I couldn't hear.
Go ahead, see if you can.
Can you hear me now?
Is that better? Margaret?
Margaret, is that better?
Now I have nothing. Yeah, that didn't work. It was better. So I think Laura's voice is coming from speakers.
Do you want me to try one of those mics instead?
Bob's gonna come to you.
Oh, boy. More
It seems to be
screens.
this.
Oh, it's, they're hearing only through Bob's pickup.
No.
How's that? Is that a little bit better? Oh, yeah, that's much better. Oh, boy. You guys gonna take my picture? This is how we do things. Okay, all right, so taking a look at the review of our sales metrics. So the activities or programs, events, and services. So we take a look at what we've done in the past. What you see here in this example is 19, 20, 21, and then only through a portion of July for 22. So we take a look wherever we are within the budget process. To Bob's point, can we do this earlier? We can do some, and then we like to get as much information in the current year as we can as we move through the drafts. So this entire, the statistics involved in the presentation and some of the fees that we've set will continue to evolve with each draft of the
This is
budget.
on,
So in this example, again, we know that our
I got it.
2019
There it
was
is.
the last year that we really had our full year. 20 and 21 had impacts to the pandemic. So we really look towards 2019 in a lot of these different areas as our last full year for comparison. So having gathered statistics, then we move on to benchmarking. Okay, so this is the basic benchmarking process for us. At minimum, it's every 2 years. However, if we have a pilot program, if something's doing very well, if something's not performing very well, we may do something midstream. And it does feel like every year we do dive into particular areas like recreation passes to take a look at where we are. Other agencies are reviewed, so you can take a look here and see some of those agencies we typically benchmark against. We also look at other HOAs and then the private sector, depending on what the program or activity is. For example, pickleball, we had to look to the private sector to check out what's going on there as well. The items that are benchmarked, it's not just the fee. We benchmark length of time, ages, ranges, times of day, because you may have a swimming lesson that we have a fee for 35 minutes and someone else is charging a fee for, but that program is an hour. There's not always an exact replica. That's something that that the staff is challenged with. So we break it down a little bit further. So using the recreation as passes as the example, this is how we do that. So the agencies we look at are local and regional. We're reviewing member and non-member with those other agencies to determine how we do. If we're high, if we're right on the mark with where they are, or maybe we're charging not enough. But again, one size doesn't fit all. So if we're taking a look at other organizations, they may have one facility, they may have multiple, indoor, outdoor. So there are a lot of different factors. So we have to start somewhere. So for our passes, we break down the actual type. So we take a look at tennis, pickleball, and pools separately. So taking a look at these, you can see these are the agencies we look at just for tennis, just for pickleball. There is some overlap, and just for pools. And I've already mentioned some of the challenges. If they're manned facilities, they have a desk attendant. We don't for tennis and pickleball. It's more sporadic, and some of these do include indoor. So the next thing that we do is we take a look at each pass type, and we look at it through a different lens, through other HOAs are doing, and then also the private and the public sector. And I'm not going to read all the information on this slide because you have it in your packet. So to sum this up, We are typically with the medium and primarily low range. And I'll get to reasons why in a little bit. So now we have the statistics benchmarking. We take a look at what the philosophy is for this pass structure. So, there you go. So is it free or is it for a fee? And so the fee is the pay to play. You have to pay a fee in order to participate, or is it free? And there's just some examples there. A community picnic or senior movie day and our other lessons and the recreation passes are for a fee. Many years ago, it was decided that those people that are actually using the facilities, pools and tennis, and then now pickleball, should help share some of the cost. And so that's where that fee has come into place. And then also non-residents are required to also pay a fee. So if that philosophy changes, then that's fine. So, but for now, this is what we're working off of as staff, the same model that this is a fee-based activity for the membership and non-members. So next up is operating. So our operating, I keep adding another slide. Our operating expense related to an activity can be changes in material supplies. Our largest changes are typically staffing, licensing permits, and we are seeing more impacts with materials and supplies. So using the recreation pass as the example, these are those items that are direct costs. So we have materials, IT resources and staff are the largest. Recreation passes are used to offset a portion of the operating expenses. And this is just a stat for you. So we, based on the 2022 budget, so if you looked at the actual, just the budget, not actuals, the revenue goal should be about $2 million, but the budget goal that was set in 2022 is $630,400. So you can see that we would, if we really wanted to pay for everything in that cost center, pools, tennis, and pickleball, we would have to significantly raise the fees in order to do that under the current philosophy and model. Okay, up next is our split between members and non-members. So these are for our activities. This is not for the recreation passes. Those statistics are a little bit later, but this is just a split for you to see as you're looking at the rest of the fee schedule. So you can see that, no surprise, that our members are utilizing our facilities and activities more than non-members. This doesn't include our walk-up events. These are really just registered programs and not the group programs that may involve more than one or a mix in between. Okay, so once we have all of that information, we have our sales metrics benchmarking from other agencies. Now we take a look, and we looked at our operational expenses, if anything was impact. We begin to build the fee schedule, and we come up with a lot of different models. So for recreation passes, we take a look at where we are, so from January through July, what those sales were, and then we fill in the blanks with where we were last year. So from August to December, those are the numbers that we used. So, and then we took a crack. We know that where some of the fees will increase. It's very rare that they decrease. We did do that a couple of years ago with passes, and with one pass in particular that seemed to work for us. And then we'll do this whole calculation again with updated information as we move through the budget process. So when we get August actuals, we'll go through this process again so that we can see where we end up landing with our best guess using the statistics that we have. You also have to factor in some other items like the fee waive. So the fee waive passes. So right now, our fee waive passes are about $24,100 through July that we've given away in those passes. One item that you all asked us to explore was the monthly fee, a monthly pass. So I will summarize this with, we are exploring it. There were challenges that were noted. Michael Lockett, I don't think is here or on the call. So he really helped put a lot of this information So I'll just simply leave it with, it is possible. Vetting is underway, and we'll have a recommendation as we move through the budget process, if that's something that you'd like to consider. Yes, sir.
Why do we want to do that?
It was a request from a board member.
Okay? Why do we want to do that?
It was I think a subscription model for non-members, so like a monthly direct debit.
I mean,
Hold on.
Summer pass, I don't really know what exactly the association was, but I do, I would like to have a problem.
Can you tell us what
Can you tell us what she said?
So she was just, sorry, Director Perry, the whole room couldn't hear with the audio in the room. So correct me if I'm wrong, you were summarizing that it was something to explore to see if it was possible to have a monthly non-member recreation pass option to build into the current suite of programs. Is that right?
That is my assumption based on the fact that I did not think that was what.
Okay, that's her assumption, though she didn't make that request. But she does have a question. So what's your question?
What are the premises for giving away the pass? Does that seem like a significant amount of money? And I'm not against it, I just would like to know what are the parameters for when, how, and why we give away.
Sure. So the question was, I mentioned the $24,000 in fee waive passes, and what is that? So we work with local agencies such as Cornerstones and others who have a process that they vet people that may need assistance with a scholarship, and part of that is this fee waived program. So if someone needs assistance, we provide that subsidy for them, and that is the current amount as of the end of July.
So is that,
Go ahead.
what's included in that? Is that if someone gets a fee waiver for a camp session or a reduced fee for a
So
camp session, is that included in that 24,000?
That's not included here. That's
All right.
separate. So
So this is
it's
only-
the same vetting process. It's the same requirement. But this is truly just for, it's members only. It's not a subsidy for non-members. It's members only, and it includes the pools, tennis, and pickleball. It's the member recreation pass.
For the camps, we have Friends of Reston that does the
Right,
camp
right.
scholarship.
Okay.
And Dave, to answer your question again, that suggestion came from me, the subscription model for a lot of, even our non-members, or those of us who are in the DSA, that we want them to join us, or they cannot join us. It's like a gym membership.
So,
We're just exploring.
Hold on one second, Lisa. I'm sorry you guys can't hear what's going on. Someone else is asking a question. I'll get right back to you.
Go ahead.
no, so the reason I asked that question is because maybe the conversation is one about non-member, how much are we going after non-members? Okay? Should we or shouldn't we? Okay? Because, not only it looked like it was a non-member program, okay? Also, when I think about benchmarking, a lot of that, other than maybe setting lesson fees or league fees or something like that, but for memberships, you don't need to do a lot of benchmarking, I don't think. Certainly, if we're doing things like the surveys that we saw, that's entirely going after non-members. So I just, one conversation might be, how aggressively should we be going after non-members? If our volumes, if member volumes are falling off, as Bob alluded to, and we've seen that, we talked about it now for several years, okay? Is the expectation we're going to make it up with non-members? Or are we having that tougher discussion about whether we have 15 pools or not? I just think we've got to, almost raise the conversation a little bit to talk about more strategically, if it's to keep 15, okay, how do you fill them? But if filling them is only going to go outside RA, maybe we have a different discussion.
Sure.
And I think similar to that, it appears that the largest portion of non-member function program areas that we saw a couple slides ago was the tennis and pickleball area, and is the value there you know, we already know there's a constraint on availability of these courts. That's the one area where non-members are really taking up some court space and limiting the amount of time that members can access it. So going off what Dave's mentioning, is there value in limiting the number of portions so that members get more access to the courts that way?
Laura, just a quick question or clarification. In your benchmarking, the various passes, you say HOA, most do not have a non-member. Does that mean non-members are not allowed to use the facilities, or they don't sell a non-member pass? What does that mean exactly?
That's exactly what that means. So we looked at 6 HOAs, and 4 of them roll in their member pass into their assessment, and 2 of them do charge a fee. And then we have 1, 2, 3 of those 6 that do not, they don't allow non-members to come in with a pass. So you would have to visit with a guest. They have guest pass options, but not like we do where you can buy in and have a pass to utilize on your own.
So we're a bit of the outbounder in that scenario. Is that fair to say?
But Dave, to come back to your question, it's. you're
Can you
absolutely
speak
right.
up, Sarah? Because I don't think you're able to be picked up at all off of.
Can they,
I think they should be able to hear you through your
my
mic
mic is
there.
turned on, so hopefully.
Is everybody that's listening at home, are you able to hear the discussion? No.
No. Do we
Just-
need
So you can
me
come up
there?
here,
Yeah.
hang out with me. Lisa, we haven't forgotten about you either.
You guys hear me now?
Margaret, Jennifer, yes, perfect.
I think the question was, how much do we increase the the non-member passes? And then if it was more attractive to a subscription model and combine some of them. Because like non-members right now, we have a special pickleball pass for non-members, which is 130 something.
125 for this year,
125.
and then we're proposed raising that next year.
And we have a separate racquetball pass. So instead of having multiple options, can we combine it? But you're absolutely right, we need to have a conversation of how do we excite our members to start using our facilities? And look at why aren't they? Like, you know, we did that survey with Shadowwood, we got good answers on why weren't they using the Shadowwood pool. So that's something we should be looking at holistically across the board and say, how do we excite our members?
Maybe we roll their fee into the assessment,
We've done that before.
right? Maybe we ought to do it again.
So those are the conversations that I think we need to have. I know from our emails, I don't think we can have it in depth here, but maybe we break into a small team that comes back with answers to us in September, and then we have that discussion. But here's our recommendations. This is what we're talking about.
I mean, for instance, I'm not convinced that the reduction in the family non-member all access has benefited us. Now, when I look at the numbers, it says, gee, we've grown 30 families, okay? But I look at the data, and you look at the data and see that tennis has not grown at all, 0. Yet pickleball's off the chart
You say tennis for non-members, Dave? Is that-
for non-members.
Thank you.
I would argue that the cost has gotten so close between tennis and pools that families are buying the pool and not the tennis, meaning they're opting for one and not the other.
Right.
So you're not gaining 30 families at $450, you're gaining 30 families at $70. And again, I've gotten into too many numbers already. The point being, I think that, you know, let's focus on members and not focus so much on it seems like we focus too much on non-members. And I think that's where the monthly, you know, option kind of got my, you know, we're giving a lot of effort to non-members when maybe we need to start refocusing a little, even though it could cost us something,
Yeah.
okay?
And the non-member, the monthly suggestion is more to just minimize it to one option
Oh,
and have it like a gym where it's $50 a month. Every year it's on direct debit, and you don't worry about, did you get a pickleball pass, did you get a tennis
Right.
pass, did you get a pass for your guests?
Right,
So that
right,
was- that was-
right. Make pickleball a tennis pass. Why even separate them? Get more money for it.
Is the racquetball pass 200 and something, so there's a
So
significant.
the racquetball includes, it's it's a tennis and pickleball combined pass, which is why it's a larger fee than the pickleball individual only. That's only for pickleball.
I mean, we can make less categories and make it simpler.
Okay, so this is just a sample of all those items that are included with passes. You all have the full packet in your materials. And again, just noting that this was a first draft that was done a while ago, and we already have some indicators that we may be able to increase some of these fees here based on the benchmarking and statistics that we have.
Dave? All right. Dave.
I'm sorry, I do have to mention a point on that slide, okay?
This one?
Right.
Yes.
If that's pass one, okay, we're raising the member fees, okay, and keeping the non-member fees down, okay? Let's not do that.
Bad message.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what was, Laura, what
So
was
we
your
have-
reasoning from staff for
Okay,
that?
so based on the statistics and the benchmarking that we did with the different types of activities and the different models, we found that they were low. And so if you, mid or low. So if you look at the very first one, the all access rest and recreation pass, we did increase it from $450 to $475. The only one we did not increase was the individual pass that includes all three of those. When we're looking now at the tennis and pickleball individual pass, that combined, that $290, we're looking at maybe $300 now. And then you can see that the pickleball pass we did. So all but one of our non-resident options we are recommending to increase based on the benchmarking on the previous slides.
But you're also recommending the increased member fees.
And that is, yes, and that's based on the current philosophy that's here, and where we also looked at benchmarking from what the other two HOAs did, what the public and the private sector. We found that there are some HOAs, and then there are also some public entities that have a town fee, and then also an out-of-town fee. And so when we were looking at all of those, we were still low. So if you want to roll the member fees in, no problem. If you would like to keep the member fees the same, no problem. Solely based on what we found that others are charging is why we recommended the fee here. So it's up to you all what you'd like to do.
I mean, one way to save a lot of work for Laura's team is to stop doing all that benchmarking for member prices. I mean, members ought to pay whatever the board says they ought to pay. That can be $1, it can be $0, it can be $100. I mean, you don't need benchmarking for the member piece. I mean, because if you're really gonna do it, you're gonna.
Passes.
Yeah,
Right.
member passes, yeah.
Right, so so, you have to pay extra to go to the pool, okay? I mean, that shouldn't be dictated by benchmarking. I don't think that should be dictated by the board and our financial situation. Why do we care what some other agency does? For our own members,
And
you know?
can I ask a question to my fellow directors? Like, what is the appetite for us for 1 year to say we roll in the member fees into the assessment?
I'm sorry, speak up, and I
What
don't
is-
understand.
What is the appetite for us as directors to roll in the
Roll
member
in.
passes into the assessment so they don't have to pay?
Maybe I can help, because this goes right to my last slide.
Okay.
Go for it.
Okay, Lisa, we haven't forgotten about you. I'm so sorry. So these are moving to the decision points of what our team needs to do to get ready for draft one. These are kind of those high level things that we need you all to determine, let us know with what to include. The first question, are we going to operate all pool and tennis facilities minus any of those that would be under construction? It's brought up because that's been asked in the past, so it's simply being asked here again. Is the board willing to increase member, non-member, or just non-member to share some of that greater load? So that was just the discussion here. So should the cost of member recreation passes be rolled into the assessment to cover those three amenities? And if you look at the last bullet, so the increase in assessment just to cover the member recreation pass loss based on the 2022 budget. So we took the member pass fee revenue out of that budget, combined them, divided it by 22,300. Close?
That's close.
Okay, households, it would be approximately $20. So that would be the increase. If you were to roll the members in, it would be about a $20 increase on the assessment. Hopefully that makes sense. Mr. Farrell.
I'm curious that when we're talking about benchmarking, I didn't see references to what I benchmark us to, Dave, both for member, non-member, is the private swim clubs across the county. My experience of it, and this is anecdotal, not, I haven't done a survey, but the quote I get from people I know who live in other parts of the county to join a swim club, which would be the equivalent, is somewhere around $1,500 a year. Are we not looking at those people or those organizations?
So we do have some of the private clubs included in here where you would have to purchase a membership and then to utilize all of those. So we do have a few. It was Lifetime, One Life, St. James, and Hidden Creek, just to name a few.
I'm thinking more along the lines of the community-based swim clubs
Yeah,
that are all, not the for-profit organizations.
So
but-
Fairfax County Park Authority.
No, I'm talking,
No.
I'm thinking like some Annandale Homeowners Association, or the Annandale Swim and Dive Club, or there are bunches of them all across the county. And what I hear is that in order, if you're within their market or whatever, their just identified area, you're looking at about $1,500 a year to have access. And they're not for profit. They're the closest analog I can think of to RA. And so I'm just curious about to what degree do we have information on those other organizations that aren't for profit. They're just, this is a community pool, and we're just here to provide the recreational opportunity. We're not here like the St. James or a Lifetime Fitness trying to enhance our shareholder value. We're just providing a service.
So like Vienna Woods Swim and Tennis Club? I think
Right,
has like
we
500.
do have, the benchmarking sheet is massive. We can't print it, I don't think. So we're happy to dive into, if a small subgroup would like to take a look at some of those, we're happy to share the information that we found and go through that to help you all make decisions.
So that was one. The other thing I had, and it's kind of along the lines that Dave picked up on, David Bright saying memory and history are two different things, and I'll acknowledge that my memory may be defective, but I do have a memory of an extended period of time, being the father of 4 children, when the passes were in part of, the cost was in the membership. And then I remember a period of time when the passes were basically $5. And then my memory is that changed when we decided to buy the photo equipment.
Right.
And in order to pay off the photo equipment, we decided to recapture the cost of the photo equipment in the cost of the pass. Now, I may be hallucinating here, and my memory may be inaccurate, but I don't recall, and somebody can point me to a board minutes, when the board actively decided, we're gonna look at member passes as a profit center, as a revenue source,
Right.
as opposed to just a cost recovery exercise. And if there is such a board resolution, I'd like to see it.
I can address that. So if you go back to 2005, when we did the Parks, Rec, and Open Space Plan, it was actually done by Pros Consulting. They looked at our fee structure, and they said, you've got, everybody in the community, all 22,000 units is paying X to have the ownership and operation of these pools, but the people who actually use them are paying $5 a person to use them, and they said, that seems a little unreasonable. We think that the users should pay a higher fee to participate. And so that was when we instituted a gradual increase, and the initial increase in the pass fees from 5 to 10 to 15 over, I think, a 3-year period. So it was very intentional to have the people who use the facilities pay a little bit more, for that privilege, because everybody else is helping them pay for the general upkeep, maintenance, and operation of them. So that was the reason behind it. And that goes back 17 years.
And that was what year?
2005.
Okay, and there was a board decision to try and do that recapturing after the plus.
Oh, yeah, it was annually part of the budget discussions. What do you want to set the fees at?
Well, okay. I'm not sure you're answering my question, but that's okay.
Well-
I'll let it go.
But it was very intentional.
Right.
To recapture more of the operating costs from the people who use the facilities. That was the bottom line.
Right.
Can
Because-
can I chime in from the chat with Lisa and Michael, who
please.
have asked some made some points. So Lisa, can't hear most of the discussion, but what I wanted to say was many of the associations do not allow non-members. I think it makes sense that we look at these variations. We have looked at consolidating into two options, all access with pools and all access without pools. I think she's asking that question. So we have those options. So it's the racket sports separated out from the pools. We have done those in the past for non-members. And then Michael, I agree with Lisa. We have facilities and have well invested in maintaining them. It would be good to maximize their benefits by bringing in extra revenue by offering different options to non-members, although we should limit the quantity to ensure the enjoyment of all the members. So that's.
And I have a quick question on that, since all of you here do that better than me. The $20, I understand where you're getting the $20 increase, but aren't we already subsidizing a lot of it on our?
Yes, so this is covered the operation is covered in two parts. One, by the pass sales, and then two, a subsidy through the assessment. And so this $20 is just for the revenue that for 2022 that was budgeted. If we pulled that member pass revenue out, non-members are still included. This is just that amount.
Can you tell us how much are we subsidizing right now, like the dollar amount already?
It's about $400,000.
No, it's more than that. It's more than that.
Our total.
It's $1.5 million probably.
So, yeah, so if you look at tennis, and I'm gonna use really rough numbers here. If you look at what it costs to operate, I'm not talking about capital, just the operations for pools, tennis, and pickleball, it's about 2.6 million.
Right there.
2.4.
2.4, okay, 2.45. So right now, minus the revenue that we're receiving for the pass sales, that's all subsidized by the assessment.
Right. It's a good $1.5 million probably.
No,
Yeah.
it's
closer to 2.
it's close to two, because it's only 452,000 that is being paid for by passes.
No.
Million and a half.
No, we get about $1 million of revenue for aquatics and tennis combined. Round numbers. And we probably spend about $2.5 million.
Budgeted for 22 for just in the aquatics 4,200. It's 343,000. So you add to that the member for tennis, which was budgeted at 51,000. So is that
That's only memberships,
just members?
okay? Aquatics and tennis revenue has also, besides memberships, has lessons, leagues, rentals. There's another 50% of the revenue.
Not included in those figures.
It's not included in the membership numbers.
Right.
Right, it's additional to that.
Right, now, that's a good point, but I think it's important, if we're just talking about, the access piece, how do you pay to get access, not,
Right.
Come in and, run a pool party or put your child in a program
Yeah.
or something. If it's just the access piece, that's what we're focused on here, the pass piece.
So the other way to look at that, and I hear the user fee approach is, you're saying to, I don't know what the delta is, the other folks who don't want to pay for the pool, use the pool, we're spending a whole lot of your money to maintain the pools, but you don't get to use them.
Right.
And so that's.
Or you don't choose to
Right.
use them.
Well,
For
no,
$20, you
Right.
could use them if you wanted to.
Also,
We're already paying 80.
right,
to not use them.
you're already paying $740 a year, and you don't get to use the pools.
Right.
And
Right.
so then you have to ask the question philosophically, well, what are you getting for your $740 besides
Yeah.
plowing the trails or something?
And will we see pool attendance go up significantly if people realize that, hey, I've got passes in my 740, In
Or
a bigger
760.
number. Correct, right. I don't know.
I do.
Well,
That
Because
will
I-
be depending on who you ask.
yeah, because I do
Sure.
see every year some people complaining, my family's not able to afford the $35 a person to get our passes this year. But, you know, I also hear the people who say, I don't swim, and I'm paying how much for those pools? So it is a balancing act, that we have to find ways to meet the needs of people in a way that makes sense, and I'm not sure what the answer to
Right.
that is, but there are good arguments on both sides.
And the key part of that is when you make that decision,
Okay, hold-
remember, it's a long-term decision, not a short-term
Direct-
decision.
Right.
Director Perry would
You can't
like
make
to
it for a
speak
year.
when you get.
It's gotta be long-term.
Well, except that the board changes over time, so it's, you know,
Yeah, you don't wanna have it in and out, in and out either.
Reality, but policy.
yeah. Ken, did you have a-
I mean, this may be along with what Larry had said. To play devil's advocate, I think if I'm a member and I don't swim or play racket sports, and I do, but if I don't, I have a choice to not buy a pass currently. When it's rolled into the assessment, I
Right.
lose that choice.
Right.
So to me, you know, if I were king, I'd keep it the way it is, to give people that choice versus rolling it into the assessment.
Discussions in the past have included, if you have a, exactly what you mentioned, if I have someone that has never used it, why should I have my assessment increased by, let's say,
Right.
$20?
Exactly.
Then you have people that may be purchasing 1 to 4 or 5 or 6 passes in a year. That is an absolute bargain. So you'll have a variety of people that will contact you no matter what your decision, or maybe even part of this discussion, you know, to weigh all.
Right, or we can also look at raising non-member fees to help offset some of that as well.
Correct. That
Yes.
was the conversation.
There may be other ways to look at operating expenses and manage them. So it might not be doable for '23, but it may be a very doable discussion for the next biennial budget.
Okay,
There are other sources potentially of increased fees from our own membership outside of this.
So,
We should be looking at those as well.
Right, we're not counting in any of those numbers, things like if you want to take tennis lessons or join a tennis league, you know, members pay for those, and they probably should continue. Non-members pay for those, and they should continue, maybe at a higher rate.
There are things like lake usage,
Absolutely, right.
which is an extraordinary bargain today, but the people who don't live on the lakes and don't have boats and don't have docks
Right.
are underwriting a substantial cost of that, which is involved in the maintenance and care of the dams and the insurance for those things.
Exactly.
Yes, Larry,
So-
what do you?
Director Perry would like to make a comment, and there's also a comment from Director Just Chaka Chat.
And I'm gonna try to find the speaker
I've
and
got a
put this
comment
at it
too.
and see if it helps.
Okay, go
Okay.
for it.
All right, Director Perry, go for it.
Margaret, we can hear you.
So, as someone who currently rents and has rented in Reston for the last 12 years, and as someone who over the years has struggled financially, I absolutely positively know that there have been years where I had to make the decision of, do we get a pool pass or not, because we can or cannot afford it. I'm very blessed, I have other resources, so, I can't speak for all that sit in that situation. But there have been years where we chose not to do pool passes. But this year, for example, I chose to do a pool pass for my kids, but not myself, because they use it more than I do, and therefore it didn't make sense for me to spend the money for me. My biggest concern in this conversation is we talk about members, and that's great. Technically, the member is my landlord. So how are we addressing the fact that if you're giving whatever you're giving to the member and that person has renters, how is that being handled? The other suggestion I make is if you want to give, let's say, with each assessment, you're getting 4 passes. And anything above 4 passes, people have to shell out for themselves. However that looks, I don't know. But that is an option also. But I do think we have to be careful in this discussion, because there are a number of people in this area where, you can sit there and say, oh, well, $20 isn't much. Well, I'm telling you right now that there have been years where $20 times 2 is $40 plus me. I can't afford it. Haven't been able to afford it. I can now, thank you. But, you know, when we're looking at these things, we need to look at how does it affect renters? How does it affect people that are struggling as is? And recognizing that there is a balance between getting to a even balanced budget while still allowing all in Reston to live, work, and play. And the play being the key.
Okay, thank you. Everybody heard you in the room, which is, it's great.
Yeah.
So Director Jeschuk did put in the chat, so I'll read that. I would like to see a few board volunteers and fiscal volunteers delve into the Recreation Pass project with staff. My own take on non-member passes is the same as Margaret's, have 2 options. For members, including renters, I would like to see the association to consider trying a 2 to 3 year period, no fee member, and increase our marketing of facilities to see if an increase in use occurs. That would be a great test in the current usage decrease we've been seeing for the last decade. Director Dodd.
Well, I guess I had a question, Ms. Laura, you showed us that you had $24,000 that was spent on fee waivers. So I assume that means if a family came to you and said, my family of 4, we can't afford the $35 a person or whatever the right number is for our passes, we want, you know, what can you do to help us?
So currently, the fee waive passes, they go through an agency or they're vetted through a checklist of items. Do you qualify for free and reduced lunch? That kind of thing. And Mike's team manages that process and those agencies.
So I guess I'm just not sure how well publicized the availability of those fee waiver options is, and can a family, like Margaret's family during a tougher year, can they say, oh, we can't afford it, but maybe we can apply and see if we can get part of the fee waived for us? I don't know whether that's an option we're readily making available and well-known to people.
Mike, do you want to comment on that?
Is that an area where Friends of Wrestling can get involved?
Possibly, but they typically have focused on the, you know, camp and
Camps and-
lesson scholarships, not just general access passes.
It did come before them, and they did support maybe last year. No, excuse me, maybe they were not supportive of that program this year without further vetting what the program looked like. So it is possible it has gone before them previously. I'm going to trip up on the years. I think so. It was 2021 that they did support, and then but they were not this year.
So they have done it sometimes, but okay.
Well, I mean, I guess I asked because I had been on the board of Reston Community Center before I left there to come on this board. And, you know, I never looked into the details, but I know that like RA, you will see a budget line item for how many fees were waived for users at Reston Community Center. And I don't know how similar their fee waiver arrangement system is to what is being used at Reston Association, but
Some of the qualifiers are similar, but Mike, do you want to comment on the pass structure and?
Well, and I have a comment as someone who's used it before, but I want to hear Mike's first.
Laura, you can feel free to jump in too, because you've been through this a lot. Essentially what happens is our member services teams works closely with a number of either apartment management as well as one, in particular, a large community organization, Cornerstones. They work with us. Essentially, we give them some forms. We remind them of the qualifiers every year. Then they work with their individual agencies to actually provide us with a list of who qualifies. We don't qualify them. We let the individual agencies qualify them for us so that we're not getting into privacy information. And at that point, we work directly with those individual agencies to ensure that we get recreation passes to them. But essentially, the information comes to us based on our qualification guidelines, but we don't make the determination as to who qualifies. It may be Cornerstones who does that, or certain apartment management groups that are used to dealing with, housing issues for those
Right.
members.
And do you know whether that's a similar system to what Reston Community Center uses? You don't know?
I don't know.
That's fine.
It's not.
It's not.
The free and reduced lunch, the different areas
Right.
are, yes.
Laura, do you know what the
Qualifying
the
factors
total
are
number
the
was
same.
this year? Do we
I
have?
don't, I
Well,
have the dollar
24,000.
amount. The dollar amount amounted to,
24,000 was,
Yeah, I don't,
We don't know what number that.
I just don't have that number in
Yeah.
front of me,
Yeah.
but
I got you.
I have a lot of other numbers and I can find that number right now.
900.
Based on- based
Okay,
on-
Director Perry wanted to
900.
speak.
Is there a particular reason we
Yeah.
don't,
Give
somewhere
fees will be a little different.
Yeah.
They can choose.
You missed that, when you were out of the room.
Yes.
So they've been
And then they,
not as enthusiastic about supporting that
So
in the
you
past
choose
as they do
camps,
just straight,
Whatever.
to learn to swim and camp scholarships and things like that.
You can choose this one.
But they did support it, what, 1 year? And do
They
some
did,
tasks.
I believe it was 2021. Okay, I have your number. So grand total, it was 576 adults,
Of course it is.
526 children, for a total of 1,102. That's through the end of July. Any other questions?
nice.
Challenge, I'm ready. Okay,
The biggest issue when you get into talking about the budget is we devolve to
Of course.
to
go
the,
into the weeds, yeah.
yeah,
Right.
get into the weeds. And
Right.
It's not that that's bad, but we'll be here
Yeah,
all
I got
the
it.
time.
Right.
Did Margaret want to make a comment?
Director Perry?
Yeah, so it's very choppy when I can hear, so I just wish you guys could tell me I'm allowed to speak.
Go for it.
I will say from someone who has used, my kids were on free and reduced lunch for many years.
Mhm.
And I will tell you that my kids have done RCC camps many, many times over the years, all three of my children, including my grown child. We did not participate in our A camps very often because even under the scholarship program, they were not afforded. So I personally, in historically, when people have asked me, hey, we're on free and reduced lunch, what's out there? RA has never been a place where I've recommended people go because it is not scholarship friendly, in my opinion. Perhaps things have changed over the years and I just never gave them a second chance, and I'll take sole responsibility for that if that's the case. But
It's good to know.
I found that it was too many hoops and the family cost to me was unattainable. So I want to be careful when we go through and we say, oh, well, we're doing this, I think it's wonderful that we're working with Cornerstones and we're giving away those types of things, but I had never been able to utilize those things effectively with RA. So I just want to be very careful that when we sit there and go, oh, well, we've got that put in place, that we're really taking a look at not only is it in place, but is it effective?
Yeah. Thanks, Margaret.
I would gather to say it's not.
Thanks, Margaret. I appreciate
I would encourage all of you to look on the website, and then we can get that to you, but the process, the forms, are on the website. So if you would like to take a look at that and see where you may observe pickups, happy to change.
And I think we all agree this is a longer conversation that needs to be
Absolutely,
had.
thank you. And like I said, I will take full responsibility if things have changed over the years, and I just didn't give RA a second chance.
Are we okay if we at least identify the team that will work with you? If we could have some from Fiscal and maybe a couple of directors who are interested in working on this? Don't all volunteer at once.
We'll accept.
Thank you, Bob. Okay, we have two directors.
I'm sorry, I didn't see who.
Me.
Bob and John.
John.
John. Dave, any volunteers from Fiscal?
I will certainly volunteer to get fiscal members.
Volunteer others.
You gonna need a truncheon, Dave?
This isn't the Army.
There are several that aren't here tonight, or at least not able to talk to you, but I can assure you that we'll put 3 or 4 fiscal people on any team we want to get together and work on this.
So are we comfortable with sort of
If you
3
need
and 3? So it's a smaller,
We
closer
can-
group, or you want
That's fine,
bigger group?
whatever you'd
We'll
like.
do that, we'll,
3 from
I just
fiscal, 3
don't
from the
want
board?
to, I don't want to pick 3 people right this minute.
Right.
Got it.
But we'll get 3 people on those,
Okay.
absolutely.
2 and 2 works too.
We'll be
Or excuse me,
accepting
as well.
applications.
3 is a good number.
No.
So let's do 3 and 3.
I'm looking for that one job position where I get to be in charge of, programming and scholarships, just saying.
Okay, we'll get you the names and then you guys can work with them.
You all let us know who
Is this
should
one
be
group?
involved and we'll get a time and a date set.
I'll get those to you.
Okay.
Margaret, I don't know if you can hear me, but are you saying that you're interested in serving on this committee?
We have 3.
Oh, we have 3? I thought we had.
Sorry, yeah, I
Zero
can hear
problem.
you, and I certainly, I would be willing to help take a look at things. And otherwise, when my board position's up, I'll be looking RA for new jobs.
Okay, so we'll get you the names and then that can be a side team that works. Any last questions for Laura before we thank her? And
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you all, appreciate it.
Well, we'll just leave this here.
Is your computer get retired or?
Yeah, good.
No, it's,
Hey, Chris, your show.
Since this is it was a pre-recorded meeting, presentation, I mean, there has been a few minor updates that were made to it since the July board meeting until now. I'll kind of highlight those probably more than anything else, so you guys can see what was changed, but beyond that, I'm not going to probably get into too much detail. Since a lot of this is probably something you've seen before in previous presentations I've given, really talking about how we actually develop the capital budget, what are the different data points that go into it, from inspections, reserve study schedules, staff suggestions, board suggestions, member suggestions, and how we kind of take all these different pieces, put them together, create a project list, then we start kind of vetting those out into project budgets, and then that's how we kind of land on it. And we do that based upon a biannual basis, but we're also working on developing a capital improvement plan, which looks out a bit further than we have traditionally done in the past. So instead of 2 years, we try to vet things out a bit more clearly within a 5-year period, and then we also target the high-value projects, the major ones, to really kind of dive in deeper, to start developing those because they take time. It was mentioned, pool renovations can take 2 to 3 years to develop, so it's something you have to get kind of started early because it's still going to take you another year once you actually get a budget to actually do construction. One thing I did update was regarding the 10-year average we currently have forecasted right now. So with the updates we've made to the budget that included some updates to the Shadowwood projected costs right now, they're still a little bit preliminary, but there is a reduction as I kind of forecasted originally. It's probably going to be closer to somewhere between that $900,000 to $1 million range after I've gone through some of the initial bids I've received from contractors and what I've received back from the county in terms of their requirements. But then again, there's still a little bit of an unknown until you actually file with them and you find out who you get as a reviewer, and then who knows what happens from there. But at least from who I've spoken to at the county, they're saying, generally speaking, it sounds like you're just doing minor modifications and maintenance. You're not expanding the footprint of the facility at all. You're just making a few modifications interior of the fence line. So theoretically,
PRC plan.
PRC plan.
Wonderful.
But let's see what they say about, converting a wading pool to a splash pad. Is that considered an accessory? I hope not, because it's still the same thing, basically. So you can kind of see the updated forecast with that. Now, from that, earlier projection, I'm not recalling if I included things like, the website development, website implementation, which was a project that was funded in a previous year. It was defunded, taken off the books, and then now would be brought back into the mix. But keep in mind that a lot of these projects that are brought in, they're from the expense category going to impact the budget from next year. But because we work on a 10-year rolling average, they don't necessarily make as big an impact as you would think, because you're taking 1/10 of that expense in that one given year, and it's spread out. to then kind of help, even the load. And that's why we do this, in order to keep erratic contribution needs from the membership on a year-to-year basis. So instead of, basing on the green line, we're going on the purple line. And so that's what we actually fund at. Now, keep in mind that last year, we brought down the contribution to the capital budget by using excess reserves or reassigning projects that we had. And so that's why we're going to see kind of a sudden, why is it $79 from last year to this year? Well, that was just based upon the fact we brought it down from last year. So we could do that again, taking that from reserves in order to lower that number down to something a bit more reasonable. But by and large, we average between, about $17, give or take, per year assessment increase impact just based on the capital expenses. And that's because we have a lot of assets that are old and they're starting to hit that point of aging out and they're going to need major work. And inflation is also becoming a bigger problem. Right now we're working on a 4% inflation rate. It used to be, before I made the updates, around 2.77, which was based on 2019 reserve study inflation factors, which are obviously completely out the window now. So 4% is probably even still low, but however, knowing that we have reserves, if we do run into a situation where that 4% is probably not keeping up with it, we still have a fallback. Because otherwise I increase it to what's probably more market average, which is like between 6 and 8%. But that would have a monumental impact on the assessment by doing that. So I'm trying to find a middle ground to work with that's going to cover us, but not necessarily push us too far over. And then, the capital asset acquisition reserve fund, there was comments about, what are some of these new acquisition projects we want to do? What do we need? What do we got to do? What do we want to do? And by and large, a lot of the CARF projects are sort of initiatives taken upon by staff or the board in the past on doing things like, making more of our facilities ADA accessibility. A big portion of the CARF projects next year is for temporary road. I'll get into that later, where we're trying to make that accessible, not temporary road, I'm sorry, North Hills Pavilion. We just did temporary road this year. And so doing the same kind of exercise where we're increasing, enhancing the site to make it accessible. But is that an immediate priority right now? That's for you guys to tell us. But it is something that we've had on the books and planned out for the last couple of years. But as I said, CARF projects are, new acquisitions and assets. Are they the day-to-day stuff we have to do through RRF? No, it's a separate category. And I mentioned about the capital improvement plan, outlines large and small, and outlines what we have coming up the next couple of years. So taking the next 5-year outlook, you have what you see in front of you. We're going to be probably averaging around 3.7 for the next 2 years through 6 and 25. We have a bit of a spike in 26, and that's really caused by projects like, I think GCI renovation is around that time period, as well as the Lake Ann Dam. But that's also one that we're still not quite sure about timing. The technical review panel, from my understanding, still hasn't been formed. And with that, it'll still take them time to then land a decision on whether or not Lake Ann is a high hazard, and we have to armor the backside of it, which even still, that 1.1.5 currently earmark is probably not going to be sufficient. But
Chris, if I might, just the technical review body is a state agency, just for people who aren't following this on a day-to-day basis. I just want, to the extent that members are watching this program on YouTube afterwards, I'd like to try and avoid acronyms.
I believe it's the DEQ is who it's under?
Yes.
DCR.
DCR.
Conservation and Recreation, yeah.
Right.
So state agency, really what triggered it, and I'll skip through that later then, is we were brought upon this new classification, and a lot of other dams in Virginia, which were not necessarily state-owned, also got hit with the same new regulations. And so it caused a bit of an uproar among a lot of dam owners in Virginia against the state of, we can't afford to do this. And so that's why they want to go back and relook at what they did to revise these risk categorizations of these dams and maybe find something that's a bit more manageable for a lot of agencies. Capital projects that are major, over $500,000, they follow this process from initiation to evaluation. Example is Lake Throw is currently in its implementation construction phase. We are on the ground right now running, versus some other projects, like Shadowwood, which is a bit more in its design, architecture, engineering phase right now. And then once we get through that, we'll then come before you guys with, here's our final project estimate. We have contractor bids ready for you guys to select. And once you select a bidder, then you kind of establish your budget based upon or around that. And then you move through again through its implementation. So with that process, it allows the board opportunities to insert themselves into the process, to check a project, either to stop it or to say go back and try again, to then allow it to progress through its cycle, so that way there's always some control elements available. Talking about the major projects, the ones over $500,000, you've got mostly tennis and swimming pools, which is really the bulk of our asset listings. And next year we have the shadow pool refurbishment. You can see the that's the requested allocation for 2023. I will note that there is prior year fundings of about another 300,000 or so that would then total it, and I should probably corrected this table, to more around a $900,000 to $1 million range. But that's still preliminary. Glade tennis court renovation. We're still kind of getting through some of the minutiae details with that, and that has also gone up since prior projections to around 638. So those are the two big projects we have on the slate for next year that would require additional funding beyond what's already allocated. Now, Lake Throw is one that is, technically speaking, right now funded through its execution. So we're not anticipating needing to add for any additional funding to that right now, at least, but we are still working through some updates and changes that came from the county. We'll see how that overall impacts the budget, but we're working through that issue with Hubert right now. And you can also tell that in some circumstances, we have projects that are phased out over multiple years. Hook Road is an example, where we have funding available and it phases out different elements of the project over time. So we'll do ball fields. First off, we already have most of that funded. We have submitted the site plan. I had Larry sign a whole bunch of stuff today for that filing. And so hopefully we'll have that here pretty soon. And then we can start kind of getting to work on some of those first pieces of the park redevelopment that came from the Hook Road Working Group back, I think it was in 2017, 2018, I think. So we can see that phase over time. In 25, 26, that's the bathroom pavilion installation. And that's kind of phased out over a 2-year cycle. So, current major projects that are ongoing right now, Lake Throw, as I mentioned, we are starting ENS controls and tree removals as we speak. They've been doing that since Monday. They'll be carrying on through the following week. And then they'll be phasing into the next sites of site development. So expect to be seeing some heavy machinery on site pretty soon. They're still anticipating a 12-month construction timeline. However, because of the permitting delay that we faced, we are placing some of the most critical path tasks on the project in the dead of winter. All the major land movement stuff, all the development on that is going to be right in the middle of December, January, February, which could cause some serious problems, as you can imagine, on trying to excavate and grade out a site. We get 2 feet of snow, they'll be dealing with that most of the day than actually trying to get the work executed. But, hope for a mild winter. I keep a close eye on the Farmer's Almanac, hoping to see what we can get out of it. But for right now, it's ballparking around sometime this time next year will be completed and potentially open for public usage again. Shadow pool, we've talked about this one before. We're working through some of the elements. I'm trying to actually get bids right now to execute the elements that don't necessitate county involvement for permits. Things like repairs of the roof or repairs of other elements on site that don't need anything. But the trick is trying to target those elements that then won't be affected by other activities on site that will require a permit. So you have to be very picky and choosy in terms of what you can go to. It's actually on that computer. And then Glade tennis, another one. Glade, it's a clay court. I know we had some discussions and there were some questions regarding about the cost benefit between asphalt and clay. Generally speaking, the upfront construction cost of a asphalt court is going to be more. The raw materials can be a bit more expensive with asphalt versus the clay. However, you have a lot more operating and ongoing costs with the clay court. You have to pay for water. There's a lot more grooming involved. Every spring, you have to recondition the clay court where you add about 1 to 2 tons of fresh clay material to each court. Then you have to lay down new stripes. So that's probably about $12,000 facility for Glade and North Hills every year just to do that. So by the time you get out to about its 40 to 42 year life cycle, they're pretty close to being dead even in that sense. So there's minor differences. I mean, if you have a lot of extra crack repairs you have to do on an asphalt court, suddenly it could maybe tip it, but more or less they're about the same when you actually look at it over a 40-year period.
Are you saying 40-40?
Yeah, so the clay court is usually around a 40-year, life expectancy, and then an asphalt court is in theory 42. There's still a few things with like water expenses that can be very erratic, and so it's hard to really plug that in. But if you look at just from we power wash a asphalt court maybe every year, every other year, and then color code every 7, recap every 21, and then replace it 42, versus a clay which is every year you do reconditioning, and then every 15 years you regrade, and then at 24 you might have some major irrigation upgrades, and then by the 40 year you have to do a full replacement. But because it has all those annual expenses, it catches up with the asphalt pretty quick. But in Newport Tennis is one we kind of gone back and forth with on quite a bit, and it's going to be a massive project because it is our largest tennis facility. It's going to be on the same level as a major pool renovation because you're talking about 6 lighted courts that are also tiered on multiple levels. And there's a lot of work to be done in terms of its distribution network for electricity. There's a lot of things. The actual panel is located in the woods, which if we ever do maintenance on it, you have to go in the woods and then yell back to someone on the court saying, yeah, that works or doesn't work. You can't actually see the course from where you are. So that would be, to redevelop it, doing everything on site to make it a lot more maintenance effective, energy efficient with LED, and reinforce the courts like we've done at Hook Road with the full depth reclamation, which is going to be the same process we'll need to do. Because we discovered when we first looked at this court that it had at least 2 layers of asphalt built up on it, which is why we couldn't replace the pole lights because they were buried under asphalt and corroded to the point where you couldn't just pop poles out, put new ones in, and just keep rolling. You'd have to tear the entire footer out, which at that point you just Swiss cheese to court.
Yeah.
So it doesn't make any sense. Let's just go about doing this the right way and full on renovate it properly. In Hook Road, working group, a lot of different elements. We're working through the site plan right now. First and foremost element would be the ball field repositionings and the backstops and the dugout enclosures. And then, beyond that would be the pathways. Now, I know there's some conversations going on regarding the roadway safety. That's been conversations we've been having with, different agencies in Fairfax County and VDOT. We already have some preliminary ideas and some background engineering to start to perhaps help them maybe do it for us. That would be the ideal scenario, but there's no guarantee on that. But it is something we are working on. Lake Ann Dam, as I mentioned, still working through that. We'd be re-armoring it, so that's what you kind of wonder what that is. So it's basically interlocking like Lego blocks that then lay across the backside of the dam like a big blanket. And so in the event of an overtopping, it won't just erode out the backside of the dam and cause a failure. So that's what it's really there to try to shield against.
So what year was it that the state reclassified it as high hazard? Do you recall?
It was around 2012, and there's been different iterations. And without getting into too much technical detail, we initially went to our regional engineer, and we actually got permission to do that overtop armoring.
Yeah.
Because in the probable maximum flood, which is like a biblical storm, there's about 2.5 feet of water overtopping Lake Ann. And then they rescinded that permission. We have all the emails. And so we went up the ladder, had a meeting out there with Delegate Plum, among others. And the advice from Delegate Plum, particularly after the technical advisory committee did not get seated because of COVID, he said, I think you just operate under the conditional permit like many other dam owners until this gets resolved. And so that's what we're doing. So we've got a conditional permit, we're all legal and all that good kind of stuff. So we're just sitting tight because in the event that we're not allowed to do the armoring as shown in that picture, we would have to essentially build a bridge or a series of giant culverts to allow that storm to pass underneath Wheelie Avenue. And for those of you who know, most major roads in Reston are lined with black ops lines and all kinds of stuff. There's also a sanitary sewer that runs parallel to the road. So there's a lot of issues. And so we are sitting tight.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And we're not alone.
Yes, I got that, yeah.
There are a couple of thousand dams like this across the Commonwealth.
Yeah, there's one down in Fair Lakes. I know the engineer
Oh, yeah.
of record on that. They've been operating on a conditional permit since about 1993,
Oh, wow.
because they don't want to replace the 1,000 feet of Fairfax County Parkway.
Another major project that wasn't necessarily part of prior iterations of the capital improvement plan is Uplands Tennis. And that's really because after, further staff evaluation, it too has multiple layers of asphalt built up on it. We did a geotechnical report on it last year and discovered that. And we also have a drain line that runs underneath the court, and it's ours. It's I think it's probably a 12 or 16-inch reinforced concrete pipe that runs beneath the court. We had that scoped by an inspector. There were a few fissures and cracks of concern that they said that would need to be addressed if you were going to renovate the court, because otherwise you're going to be digging up the court to get to it. So you might as well knock out 2 birds with 1 stone, which then increase the value above that threshold, which makes it now a major project. Now, keeping in mind, because now we're getting out to 25 and 26, our accuracy of numbers start becoming less and less. So we'll definitely go through these and continue to refine them and go through them over time, but know that that may not be the final figure. It could likely, or very likely, will go up. But this kind of gives you an idea of what is going to happen over there, what needs to happen. And GCI Pool is our next kind of major pool renovation after Shadowwood. And we've already had the Parks Recreation Advisory Committee out there to kind of tour the site. Now, this is a situation of a facility where we're not really needing to get into a lot of repairs necessarily, but there are lots of opportunities to enhance. It's a nice footprint. It's got a lot of open and available space to do something in an otherwise underserved community that could definitely benefit from a lot of these types of enhancements that were actually proposed, back in 1998. And that's actually a snapshot of the concept plan that was drafted, I think, by Miller Architects, that had a lot of interesting ideas and concepts you could do to that site. And so a lot of the money that we'd be spending would be going directly towards improvement and enhancements, not necessarily just repairs,
Great.
which is kind of nice in that instance.
Yeah.
And then Shadowwood Tennis is out in 2026. Now, I know there's been a lot of back and forth about, well, timing of Shadowwood versus the Shadowwood pool versus the tennis courts. Well, being that the work that we're focusing on for the pool has been reduced down to the refurbishment, there really isn't going to be much impact in terms of the tennis court renovation down the road, because the parking lot, assuming we don't get hit with any kind of requirements by the county, would remain relatively unchanged. We might do some restriping to then kind of reconfigure maybe an ADA spot at the base of it. But beyond that, we wouldn't hopefully need to expand it beyond anything for additional capacity, because we're not increasing the capacity of the pool. And we're not doing anything that would otherwise trigger any kind of PRC plan or site plan requirements. But as I said before, until we actually start permitting through the county, we'll know for sure. But on the information I have on hand right now, we're not going to need to get into that. So the focus would be just on the renovation of the tennis court. Now, this would also be the last facility we'd be upgrading to LED lighting. And so that would be kind of a nice ending of our upgrades and our enhancements to those facilities, which do draw quite a bit of power. We're talking about 1,000 watts per fixture currently on the metal halide. LED is about half that. And then basically the very last major project we have in the books right now is Rich Heights Pool. It's only one of the currently 2 heated pools. Shadowwood would be our newest addition, but it also operates on electric, which is horribly inefficient when you're talking about heating a body of water of this size. We're upwards of $11,000 a year. It is our highest energy consumer in the organization, more than this building, CSF, Nature House, done now. It's just really based upon those heaters alone and how much they draw. It's like 2 of them, they're at 36 kilowatts, which is something like 10 or 12 of your home water heaters running simultaneously nonstop.
For 2 months.
For 2 months, yeah. At least that many. That's probably more like 24 of them total. It's a ton of power being used. So, perhaps as part of that renovation, we look at maybe, since we have Shadow as a heated pool, maybe we don't need to heat it. Or we find another way to heat it other than using electric, running a gas line. Or we maybe decide to make Audubon perhaps heated instead, which is around the corner, gets a lot more solar radiation, which means it won't require as much energy to heat. And maybe Ridge Heights kind of stops becoming the heated facility. We just switch over to Audubon. So that's potentially an option you could look at. This facility in the past, and I've had discussions with John about it, its history on its bubble in that situation, why that sort of fell through. There was a zoning issue that kind of came about from that whole thing. and so that's why it's gone. But it did at one point have a year-round element to it, but it has since been removed. However, because of that installation, way back when, there's a lot of different things that are kind of weird about this facility. It has its own electrical sub-closet, which is really unused because it was there to support all of the heating and ventilation systems that were for that bubble. The deck is basically a mosaic of pieces because it had concrete footers scattered all about it that were there to tie down the bubble. And so, on the project list for this year was actually to try to resolve a lot of those issues on the deck because we now have a lot of offset drainage problems, trip hazards, and other, movements that are caused by having so many different pieces on a deck versus nice one uniform slab. So that, that's something we're going to try to mitigate now, but with this project, there's a lot of things that you could do to it. One element that is kind of, something that came up is, it's not a lit facility, but it does operate in off hours at night. So it's kind of a bit of a situation that we even do that, but, it's one that we've been managing well for the last number of years without any kind of complaints. But it is unusual the fact that there's no deck lights at this pool. It's completely lit by underwater lights and whatever comes off the building. So that covers all the major projects. You guys have any questions for me on any of those?
The website funding, I don't understand. There were some questions passed around by email recently. There were some questions about the website funding that I'm not aware of it getting defunded. Where did those funds go? When were they defunded? Because the search that I saw took place, no one came up with any board decision to defund it.
So at the end of last year, as part of the budget development, the exercise was taken by if any projects that had no progress, no contracts, no POs, no DRB applications whatsoever, were just taking off from the carry forward list and just basically undesignated and put back into the RRF fund. So, and that was one of those projects because we were still waiting through the IT maturity assessment and the IT committee to then help guide how we would then execute the website. So there is that project as well as a couple of other ones that were just not carried forward because there was no progress.
Are you talking about the November meeting where there were dollars identified to reduce the funding in RRF? Or are you talking about it? I understand.
It was both. We had identified it earlier than that as projects that we are not gonna, we're gonna use your term defund because there's been no progress whatsoever. As Chris said, no contracts, no movement. So we're gonna have the board reauthorize those at the time when, we need to do those projects. And the website was a perfect example. We had nothing going on. And then it was codified with the approval of the budget in November.
So the board did discuss defunding the website. Okay, I'm just saying, I saw emails that looked to find that information. And I mean, a year ago, it was in the budget, or in approved projects for like $125,000.
And at the end of 2021, we removed it because there had been no traction on it.
It wasn't marked as a carry forward like it had been. So the argument, you remember in the past, was about why are we carrying forward projects year over year that aren't getting any movement? And so instead of continuing to drag them along and earmark them to defund them or nature them, and then at the time we plan on doing it.
I don't disagree with the concept, okay? I just, when we had the meeting in November to discuss the budget and we reduced RRF funding, okay, and we found ways to do it, it was Lake Newport Tennis as a project, and then it was variances, positive variances that were built up in RRF and additional either project positive variances or something, okay? The only project listed was the Lake Newport. That's why I was surprised to hear when the website funds went away, because they were not part of the November budget discussion that I remember. That's
So
all.
it was part, we just didn't carry it
through.
forward, so they went into the overall RRF balance.
So we didn't do that as a separate action, but we did that when we voted on the budget as a whole. That's
Okay. Okay.
So, the CARF projects, again, these are, a lot of these driven by member suggestions.
I'm sorry, I've got another one on triple RF, okay? Hunter Woods, okay, is that the name of it? Hunter Woods, so there's a project coming up. There were funds in the budget for Hunter Woods,
The
The ball field,
Ball field.
the ball field.
the ball field.
It's a conversion of the ball field.
Is that part of what's coming up in the,
In the next
That's
piece,
the
yeah,
next
on
slide.
CARF, yep.
maybe I should wait for that then. There was a lighting project and a ball field project, both in.
Lighting
So-
project?
Wasn't there a Hunter Woods lighting, pathway lighting project in
So-
CARF?
So that was redesignated by the board, I believe, it was last year, the year before, to focus on the redevelopment of the ball field site instead. So those funds, basically the name of that project was changed over. There was also an additional small allocation that was for us to do a lighting study and bring in a consultant who's doing kind of an outline of our lighting design program.
Why don't we go over the Hunter Woods and then we can
Sure.
see if, because, so there may be already some funds
Yeah.
in our
There are.
approved,
Yes.
There, yes,
Yeah.
And what Chris is identifying
is
is additional.
additional,
To complete it.
yes. And even still, we're still trying to get the numbers figured out. We're
okay?
working through the county right now on some final details with them regarding the site plan approval, to then be able to move forward on getting this out to RFP and start finalizing some numbers. I might just have to pull the trigger and start getting it going now, because I don't have time to wait. But, right now we have maybe a little over $100,000, I believe, in the budget right now for the Hunters Woods ball field redevelopment. But that would not be nearly enough to tackle a project of this scale. You're talking about moving, hundreds of square yards of material around, installing a lot of pathways, a lot of landscaping, and so it's going to need additional funding for sure. So the thought process would be to perhaps execute as much of the work as we can towards the tail end of this year, and then as we roll into the next year's budget, we then roll into new funding to then kind of carry the project forward and keep it moving until completion. Because we already have some funding now, but we're not going to have enough to then keep it going to absolute completion.
Are we saying we're gonna do work on this site before site plan
No.
approval of the county?
No, I wouldn't do that. Assuming the site, we would literally just one technicality we're trying to get through before they approve it. Assuming we clear through that quickly, yes, we would then still hopefully maybe get something going on that site before year's end.
Before year's end?
Before year's end, yes. After we get approval of the site plan, we already have DRB approval, so we've already gone through all of that. And then we would then continue the project into the first, 2 quarters probably of '23 to then wrap it up. That way we just sort of parcel the funding out as we need it, kind of like mid-lake throw, instead of asking for it all up front, we're kind of phasing it out. Polo Field Spray Park electrification, this is a relatively small CARF request, but I think it would help us out in terms of our operations. Austin, who is, I took him from the aquatics department, knows this very well. And the fact that, that facility operates on batteries, and so they are very temperamental, they require a lot of ongoing maintenance and upkeep to keep this thing running. And it's also just kind of a sad little fountain, to be quite frank. It's a single stick and then 2 pop jets out of the floor. There's opportunity to do a lot more here that could be a lot more entertaining and interactive. And so the idea is just already doing work to the fountains as part of triple RF. This would be kind of supplemental to the work already scheduled there, which would be to electrify it, to address the problems we've had in the past of keeping batteries charged. I remember when I was working in aquatics, I would walk over there every 3 weeks carrying car batteries, 2 or 3 at a time, and then throwing them in there and hooking them up. So it's not fun. We're working through estimates. We're already looking at trying to do solar. There's an opportunity to kind of place it right there on the pavilion. It's got great solar exposure. We'll just have to see how DRB thinks about it. The other option would then be to go to a hardline connection, which we're still trying to get some numbers figured out. It's a bit unusual with Dominion because they tend to offset the upfront expenses based upon projected usages. And so you have to kind of do like a load letter, and then they kind of come back and tell you whether or not how much it's going to cost. So for right now, I've had $12,000 as a pending estimate. I'm pretty sure it'll cover the solar, but that's not necessarily a slam dunk option for this installation. In North Hills Park Pavilion ADA upgrades. This, as I said before, is kind of a continuation of work we started at Temporary Road on making more and more pavilions ADA accessible. This is a preliminary concept. We worked with Kinley Horn about 2 years ago, installing kind of an elevated walkway that leads you from the parking lot, which we have a new ADA spot, through the woods, gets you to the pavilion, new grill, new access to the playground, and ADA access for the bathroom enclosures. And we already have work scheduled there to repair different elements of that site at RRF. So it's another opportunity to sort of combine work that was already required with new things that we could do at the same time for better economies of scale and just better, bigger member input, or greater member impact.
Can I just add one thing to that, Chris? Also, the Rest and Accessibility Committee did, basically one of their audits. I did that one on Temporary Road and North Hills, and so, we've been pretty responsive because they're pretty on the spot with their recommendations, and so what we've got proposed here responds, directly to their report.
And I think this is the last one, right? So this is electric charging station installed over in Nature House. Now, there is potentially an opportunity, we haven't approached them just yet, for Friends of Reston to fund this one for us instead. So it's still an ask we need to make, but I think based upon their mandate and history with that site, they're probably going to say yes to it, which would be great because it would then help facilitate our first fleet EV vehicle that we'd be purchasing, would be a passenger vehicle, probably an Escape, and sort of mark our first vehicle to transition over to that. Dave?
Why does RA want to be in the electricity business? I don't understand. So, right now there are charging stations in Reston. There'll probably be, dozens added every year for the next who knows how many years. I don't understand why we want to be in the electricity business.
I think you want to be in the electricity business because ultimately you're going to switch your entire fleet to electric. And you're going to need to have the experience and understand what is involved so that you can handle that well and not run into problems when you have 100 vehicles.
Cam, you want to add to it?
Yeah, sure. So in a lot of the conversations that I'm having with clusters, clusters are navigating that conversation right now. There is a desire for access to EVCS, and I think as we look 5-10 years from now, most of the vehicles on the road are going to be EVCS. So Reston would be proactive in having that conversation and looking into it.
I think it'd be great if the clusters could all have charging stations in their clusters. If a single home can have them, so can a cluster. Now my point, okay? If I got a vehicle sitting at this site, okay, I will have to pass 2 or 3 places to go to the nature center to charge my car. I mean, I'm talking about a charging station, why we are owning them, okay?
Yeah,
Clusters should have all they need, I think it's wonderful. But I don't know why we want to own them and manage them and deal with them.
No, I agree as a general openness to the public that is not what.
I mean, we don't own gas stations,
we
right?
will
How do
need
we
to-
gas up our vehicles? We
We
go to a
have
gas
tanks.
station.
We will
At
need
central
to,
facilities.
So I'll jump in
Put
just real
one
quick
there,
here.
don't put one at the nature center.
So the primary driver of this installation is because the Escape that is stationed at Nature Center is up for replacement. And so this charger would serve predominantly that RA-owned vehicle for the purposes. That's what the Nature House staff uses, is that vehicle. So that's where it would be. That's where it would charge at its home station. Now, the discussion can be made about whether or not this is open access, that anybody can come in and charge up. Now, there are plenty of options. That Bosch unit, for example, can be retrofitted with a pay-to-use function. So if someone that's not an RA authorized person would have to pay to then use that charger. You could do that, but I'm not really sure how that gets into finance elements. I'll let Tom and those guys figure that part out, but that is something you could do. But the reason for this is not to serve necessarily other people. It's to serve the RA vehicle that is stationed there.
That would have been my major concern, if we think we're going to set up stations that are going to provide people with electricity.
It would not be an advertised installation for just.
Okay.
all one come all use it.
No, and Dave, we worked with some specialists, and including Kimley Horn on this, and it is not a profitable venture for us to sell electricity, plus it takes up parking spaces in a lot of facilities that don't have
That
enough
was his
parking
point.
already.
That was my concern.
Now,
being
the
in
other
that
point I
business.
will make, though, is that, if we continue the transition, particularly for, vehicles here, and we don't own this property, there's 2 chargers attached to this building, Irvin's car's probably out there right now. We wouldn't have enough capacity on a daily basis to charge those with the 2 that are sitting there. Similar with the CSF, we would have to install all the infrastructure, and probably get increased service as well to be able to do that. And that's a very gradual process, as Irvin said. So this is kind of our first step in that direction for RA's use, not the public use.
Right, I don't think RA should be selling electricity.
No.
It's really to support our
I agree.
eventual transition.
Gotcha.
And right now, we've not been able to identify anything on the current market that can fit all our requirements for payload, towing in a truck. They're coming, they're just not here yet. And the ones that are starting to come out are waitlisted. I think the Ford F-150 Lightning is like 2 years on the wait list, and it doesn't meet our requirements still. So perhaps if they start bringing like F-250s and 350s in that could fit the bill, then absolutely, maybe we start transitioning over to that for installations. But knowing that as we do that, we're going to need to create the infrastructure to support it. And it's not going to be cheap, especially when you're talking about installing dozens of charging stations at CSF, for example, to support, all the 60 vehicles I think that are stationed over there. So that's all I had on, any other questions for me? I did just see something from Jennifer here. I'm sorry I missed it. Talking about the motions about the website. November 20 reflected only this few specific CARF projects were removed, so the website funding should still be on the books for 23. We should only have the difference between the previous funding and the increased cost staff is estimating in the future. I can look at that and kind of see how that may impact the actual assessment from that standpoint, but it also depends on what we decide to do in terms of excess, or reserve funding offsetting what we did last year. We would basically be using that money to help do that essentially. But I can kind of see what impact and ensure we're not double dipping in any way.
Madam President, I had submitted a series of questions to the staff in response to this proposal, and the staff was good enough to provide answers to that. And all I would ask is that in the minutes of this meeting, that those answers be included, so that as we go forward, we have the benefit of those answers, if that's acceptable to without objection.
I don't see anybody objecting, any issues?
Thank you.
Just a reminder, please copy the board when you ask questions, so the rest of us can also be included.
I have a question. Since we've been talking about electric vehicles and electric charging stations, is there some sort of addition to your long-range planning to take that into account, and how would you take it into account?
So that is something that I am still trying to wrap my head around as to what the overall impacts between, the costs of EVs, which are high right now, but likely to go down over time, the additional cost for the infrastructure, and then there's, other elements that you could, theoretically hop on that right now with, small engines and electric power equipment for landscaping. But I believe, Mike Mack provided some of the background as to the impact of that expense. And you're talking about like doubling your average cost for an equivalent zero-turn lawnmower to go with electric. So again, it's probably a scenario where maybe we just buy one and maybe trial that and then kind of slowly phase in, kind of like what we're doing with the vehicles, instead of just saying, any new mower we buy right now is going to be electric, because it's going to have a major spike in the expenses. So we could definitely do that. Right now, we have like 2 or 3 mowers on the docket for next year's budget, but they're all forecasting to be, gasoline. If the board wishes to do so to perhaps trial a different type instead, electric, then I can absolutely do that, but I'll have to update the budget, and it would be an increase for sure.
Thank you for asking that.
Chris, in the schedule that you put out for your 5-year CIP, you had major projects of about 10 million in total. do you have an idea of rough order of magnitude of the total budget? So we've got projects that are above $500,000.
So on that slide again. So this table accounts also for the major projects occurring. So this is a roll-up of everything in this table. So,
Okay,
in 2023, you're talking about 1.4 million of the 3.74 is
Okay.
the major projects. And so that's how they all correlate to each other.
Can you go back to the previous slide with the schools and the tennis? Yes. I'm not sure, I'm bringing this up, I'm not sure if Director Perry will, but we've had conversations at the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee, and Director Farrell may be able to chime in. As you all are working through the budget process, one of the items that you're considering is a survey to be implemented next year. So as you look at some of these renovations, this would be a perfect choice survey question to add related to use Golf Course Island as the example. What would you like to see? If these are your choices, would you be willing to invest these dollars? Would you be interested in an impact to your assessment of blank to include these blank amenities? So just something to consider as you move through. Oh, thank you.
I know Fiscal had some thoughts.
Yeah, this is obviously one of the most important categories that we can talk about, and it's certainly going to have the most impact. Pool fees won't have as much impact as these will have. CARF, for example, okay, which, PrAC hasn't really gotten into this yet, and when they do, okay, it could be very interesting. The last 6 years, we spent $250,000 on CARF projects. The next 5, we're doing 1.9 million. It's without PrAC putting anything in yet. So and if it's electric, which I'm gonna guess, are they CARF and not triple RF?
You're talking about, it's conversion is probably, it's almost probably equal. I'm not gonna probably call that CARF since it's a replacement of an existing asset, which is a vehicle, it just happens to be electric.
Like for like.
There's
got
upgrades
4
and
wheels.
enhancements. There's a little bit of a nuance there in triple RF.
The cost is there. But I'm just saying, this is going to explode, I think. And, one of the things that I would strongly recommend is that I think that finance, along with fiscal, okay, ought to look into, start doing things like 5-year pro formas, okay? And I don't mean at the level of detail we do in some of these things. I mean at the top 5 numbers, okay? Start looking out at some of these things because, again, when I sat in some of these meetings only 6 or 7 years ago, the comments were that, triple RF, we're in good shape for the next 20 years, okay? Well, it's 7 years later, okay? And I guess this is all gonna lead back to the discussion of, the idea of keeping assessment rates where they are or significantly low, I think is something that we really gotta get our head around because I don't think it can happen. I think there's going to be decisions that need to be made by this board and this board, okay, in a very short period of time on what it takes to fund, RA. And we may have to get creative, but I think, the creativity of cutting back triple RF, to make a number or to using operating cash to help hold the number, that's not the creative way to do it. We do it where we can, where we have to, or where it makes sense. But this is gonna take some serious planning and the numbers are gonna get very big. So that's, I think we need to do some almost further out even pro forma type of looking at things because these numbers are real. The stuff is, triple RF is no longer at the 2.5 million range a year, it's now 4 million range a year. CARF is not at 50,000 a year, it's, 500,000 a year. So, and it's gotta be done. And we haven't even gotten to insurance yet, so.
it's,
Good. say, I saw that too.
Larry, did you want to share your, the July memo, if you can, on screen? Very quickly. It is in the board packet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it in there?
Yeah.
Oh,
It's in the Dropbox.
One second.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think we've covered a lot of this, but if we want to just quickly run through if there are any,
That's his June memo? Yeah,
sorry, Erwin? What was
that's,
the
that's
question?
his June memo.
This is what, remember when we got member suggestions on budgets, we narrowed it down and sent it to staff, and I think,
So I had one question I put in the chat for Chris, if you could give us an idea.
What is the assessment dollar difference between what was approved in the 23 budget at the end of 22 by the board and what Chris is presenting tonight as a proposed capital budget? So I had that cost comparison, I think, between what was in the November of last year to today, and I showed a side by side. And I think that number went up by, I think it was like 3.2, now it's 3.7, so about $500,000 is what was increased. But again, keep in mind that we don't fund based on that, we fund based on the 10-year average. So I'm not really sure if there was a dramatic change per se. I mean, there's probably, some, but I have to kind of go back and factor the exact figure that adjusted. But again, that's $500,000 increase on the expenditure side, but not necessarily on the contribution requirement.
do we want to take a 5-minute bio break and then we'll all come
Yes,
back?
please, yes,
Thank
please.
you. Yeah, yes, just breaking for a few minutes.
We're gonna take a quick break for bathroom here.
Fantastic, thank you, folks.
Yeah, sure.
We're running a little longer, we should hopefully end in the next 10 minutes. This is the memo that Larry helped put together from the budget suggestions that we had over 50, and we as a board narrowed it down. So is there?
So let me just whip through these. We talked about the program fees and I think this one is That's right. I don't want Sean pinging me, talking to the mic. So I'll just scroll through these. This one I think we've got covered.
We're working on the website.
Website,
It's
which we
moving.
talked about.
And the entire board was very supportive of that.
Yeah, and this one,
35,000 was
which is the IT
unanimous.
committee recommendation.
Yes.
So Laura and her staff are working, she'll have scenarios for you.
So on that, if we can stop for a minute, I think we've heard from members and from other directors about, we're not very happy with the shorter pool season. So when we come back, if you can give us some suggestions, recommendations, how do you plan on addressing that? Because that
Yes.
seems to be a member.
We'll
And I
have-
know COVID and you've had lifeguard shortage.
We have hours of operation that we can look at to compare year over year with explanation on things like Fairfax County Schools changed. There's their operating date, so it had to reduce the number of weeks and other explanations. We also will have 2 additional facilities online, so that does put a strain on the number of staff, and we have the scenarios for the board approved a 2-step last year. They approved a 2-step, so going increasing guard salary. So that's our scenario 1, and we have benchmarking information, so you all can consider to go with that number again, or should you consider something different?
Okay. Directors, anything else you'd like to hear from? The guard, sure, go ahead, Erwin.
There have been a number of concerns expressed about the length of time that the pools are open in terms of the season, and this seems to have been a season that was particularly short. What I would like to hear is how we are going, not to explain why it has happened, but to explain what is going to be done to improve the situation.
That will come with it, yes. So presenting scenarios and options to you all.
Okay.
Some of that includes increasing the salaries to attract the staff when we have competition of $15 to $19 an hour in this area, and they're currently paid $13.25
They're currently paid $13.25.
at the base. So we'll have all of that for you to
Okay.
consider.
Okay.
Laura will have more numbers than you will want to look at.
I have 5 pages
It's okay.
prepared right now.
My daughter was one of those underpaid lifeguards, so I'm eager to see those numbers. You know, and I apologize, it's probably not this forum to bring this up, but, you know, when the pools do have short-term emergencies, you know, someone's got to close down because of unsanitary conditions or electrical problems, or I see it on Facebook, sometimes I guess it comes out on Twitter. It would be great if there were, if there were a way to also have a box so that when I see things on Facebook, they say, here's a change, look at our aquatic schedule. Well, you go to the aquatic schedule and it's never updated with short-term things that happen. And so that needs to happen so that, you know, so that those who do use that aquatics page as a place to try to stay current actually are current there.
The challenge is the website doesn't give us all.
Oh, that's right. Okay, so I understand. And we'll get there someday.
We can manage social media sort of almost on the spot. And
Yeah.
actually, there are a number of members of Laura's aquatics team that can actually go in and do those social media posts
Great,
immediately.
yeah,
The website, we don't have that capability.
I
And
understand.
ultimately, that'll be, we hope, a solution
Yes.
that we'll have with the new website.
And these, are you looking at like push notifications? Go ahead, Jennifer, go ahead.
But we have all of these email addresses of people who have rec passes in WebTrack. Why can't we use our are you using Constant Contact? I can't remember which one you're using, Mike. But why can't we use that to send out blast emails when a pool is closed?
Well, I personally would like to chime in as someone who manages about 6 different emails and gets hundreds of emails a day. That is the last thing I want.
Yeah,
North- pool being closed because I don't give a damn.
Well, and I don't know if the website, because your Facebook posts go up at a pretty good timely manner, and maybe the tweets too, I don't follow Twitter as much. I don't know if it's possible for the website on the aquatics page to have, please check our social media for,
It can't right now.
it cannot,
It
okay.
can't.
Okay.
And ultimately, the ideal solution, which is something that we want to look at with the new website
Yeah.
platform, is SMS text alert notification. I
Right.
mean, that's the ultimate solution, right? The ability to be able to push to those members who subscribe
Yes,
for
thank you.
pool information, because our current scenario, as you know, Lori, is a pool scenario, right? You've got to go and you've got to look for that, whether it's
Right.
on social media,
Yeah.
or through some other
You need to-
channel, and it's just not convenient. You want to know if your neighborhood pool is closed. And SMS text notification is the ultimate solution that we need to move to. And I think, Margaret, to your point, email even becomes cumbersome.
Yeah.
Pushing out a quick constant contact push, which again requires staff. We can do that during the week, but when a pool has an issue on a weekend, and you don't have the staffing resources in place to do that, and it takes time to build one of those, it's not practical, but text alert notification is the ultimate solution.
And with the
Thank you.
text alerts, you can almost modify it to just be pool specific. So if my pool is Shadowwood, then only I would get it if Shadowwood is
Right,
closed.
you could go in and
I couldn't
subscribe
care less
and
about
elect
by
to
pool.
what you
Correct.
want. I mean, you could get all pool notifications, or you could select the
Correct, which
ones
ones
that
you
are
want.
appropriate
Yeah.
to your interest.
And so those you're saying you're already talking about with the website?
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, that's something even when we were talking 2 years ago about the start of the website project, that was the kind of feedback that came to us in the member surveys that we did, was people wanted the ability to have those kind of messages pushed to them, and you opt in if you're
Yeah,
interested in
that's-
receiving them.
Well, it's good to know that you already have that in the plans once it gets to be right time to do it.
So, and Laura, when do you think when you come in September, you'll have all of that for us as far as the extending hours and things?
Yes.
At the September fiscal, we would have those answers, or September board meeting?
When will we be ready?
I have 5 pages started.
Of how
I'd like to give the
many?
aquatics team some time, because they're, to the point of additional staff, they're outside a lot. They're not at their desks. So as long as I can have,
Are you okay if we said September regular board meeting?
yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think we talked about major project already. Do you still have any questions, Larry, on that from the board? You want any answers?
Yep.
Open space management with the trees, I know we talked a little about Friends of Reston, seeing if they can take that project on.
This, I have concerns about this project
Okay.
in its enormity.
The tree trimming?
Yeah, a lot, I mean, when a tree falls from our property, or a cluster property, or anybody's property on the VDOT right away, it's called in, VDOT, or the police, and even us, if we have a crew out there that happens to be driving by, like in those snowstorms.
Yeah.
We were, Glade Drive had all those trees that come down. So we would cut them and clear the path. But in terms of proactively going out there and identifying hundreds of trees and taking them away, taking our own staff away from the many, many hazardous trees that we have.
Yes.
And you have to remember, these are road-facing trees. Like that was my takeaway on this. We have probably 500, I'm just throwing a number out.
Yeah.
Hundreds of miles
Of course.
of property lines where, our property meets Irwin's backyard and all these other, or cluster backyards. And so we also have to look at those trees,
Yeah.
not just the ones on the roadway. So this is a very daunting thing.
Absolutely.
So,
I don't
as
think that's,
and the idea came from Scott at Fiscal. So are you okay with looking at this for a future date, not right now, and maybe working with Scott and EAC and others?
Yeah, I don't see this, I personally think this is a high priority,
Okay.
given all the other things that we're dealing with.
yeah,
This is Jennifer from It's a safety issue. If you try to pull out on Sunrise Valley Drive and those properties that abut RA versus the county properties, you can't see at all of those intersections where you try to make a left or a right onto a major roadway. It's a safety issue, and our members have no option to fix it because they're RA. Unless staff can think of another way. I mean, do we call the county? What should people do when they can't see to make a turn on a major roadway?
So that's a different, I hadn't heard that in this discussion. There are a handful of RA parcels, and I'll use Sunrise Valley as an example. There's a handful of RA parcels where roads come out. So when you think about South Lakes Drive, you come out to Sunrise Valley on South Lakes Drive, we don't own any property on those corners. So there's two clusters, one on each side of the road there, on the south side of Sunrise Valley. So there are a handful of spots that we do own up, further to the east, Oldfield and Midsummer and places like that. Those are different. Those are site distance easement questions, and most of those places have site distance easements established by VDOT. In fact, we called one in not too long ago. So the first point of attack would be, does it impinge on an easement that's already established on the ground, and perhaps VDOT will take care of it? If not, and we own the property, yeah, we can certainly take care of those. But again, a lot of our property at those places is very small, and a lot of it is, frankly, an individual lot owner who backs up to Sunrise Valley Drive, and it's their trees. So we're happy to look at those. Those are very specific situations. What I was referring to is like every overhanging tree from RA property on Glade Drive, Wheelie Avenue, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
And to address that point, I think MTAC was talking about working with clusters and condos on areas where there are trees that are low hanging, from like Dinah Smith's email.
Right.
They were looking at.
Right, but again,
addressing those.
so much of that is not our property.
Yeah. Jennifer, does that address your question?
Can we narrow it then to those that are on RA property? Would that help narrow it enough to get a budget estimate?
Well, it would be, so we've got.
Because there's like the path, Larry, on the south side of Sunrise Valley. That's an RA path. And so the 3 or 4 streets that are going up Sunrise Valley on the south side, that's an RA path. Those trees, I believe, belong to RA, because I've checked with some of the clusters. They think they're RAs. So that's why I think some of this
Can we
came
come
up.
back to this point, and Larry, could you work on this later, and we'll come back to this and say we'll touch this?
That's what I'm trying to ask. Would it help to limit the project for staff to do an estimate on those limited areas?
Yeah, we can certainly look at the limited areas, and if it's, if it's by intersection, but again, the initial ask the interpretation that we had was that it was basically every RA parcel that abutted a public roadway, which is miles and miles and miles of trees, as opposed to very specific intersections where there's a site distance easement or site distance problem.
Okay. Moving on.
I think that the question came on because it's a safety car issue.
Yeah.
And
So-
maybe we should look at addressing the safety intersection issue first.
I think
if
we
that
do
helps
have
limit.
MTAC working on that, Jennifer, and I can connect you to Mike McDermott. I know they're looking at those, and Larry said he'll bring this back as well, right? Future conversation? And he's furiously writing notes, so I know we'll hear about it again. Okay, moving on. The low priority items, we haven't seen them, but we can come to that later.
So I don't know if you want to go through these.
The only one I had a question on was D, but other directors, if you have any questions on any of those, I had a question on D, which is fine.
as in dog?
Indoor space for camps.
Yes.
I don't know if we're there yet this year, but is there a way we can look at how much we use our headquarters, and if there's part of it that we can repurpose or something along those lines?
There was a
We can-
proposal.
Oh, go ahead.
There was a proposal 10 years ago that I happen to be somewhat familiar with, that Larry remembered. And you may still have the drawings to create such a space at Brown's Chapel that would be multi-purpose. And I believe that the estimate we had 10 years ago was about a $50,000 exercise. And that might be something to revisit in answer to item D.
Well, we also had an idea, last year and a half ago to add some camp space with a yurt, and the DRB patently tossed it out the door, which I thought was ridiculous.
What?
A yurt.
We have a lake house.
We have a lake house.
Yeah, so could staff come back and give us ideas to repurpose our existing or available indoor space?
Yes, we can do that. And just keeping in mind that the lake house and this space here is also a rental space. So Mike and I can work on something together.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Any other questions we had? Do you need anything from us, Larry, for this part?
No. Okay. I think these were pretty straightforward.
Yep. G, does Cam want to tell us a little bit about G? Short and sweet?
Sure. So this was an idea that I am bringing forward from the community that I came from. So compliance is a big part of what we do, and so to defray the costs associated with some of the compliance follow-up, so for everyone who's not familiar, the enforcement process is basically a 6-month process that takes about 4 to 6 different types of inspections that happen on a property. And so at a certain point, the entire membership is paying for those follow-up inspections to happen. And so those properties that continue to be non-compliant should really bear the cost of those additional inspections that are conducted. So we're suggesting establishing a service fee to really defray the costs associated with those enforcement inspections.
Is the idea to do that on every enforcement inspection or just after the third or fourth or fifth time?
After Covenants has found the property owner in violation, that's when the inspection fees would start, since it's an alleged violation until Covenant says that it's a violation, essentially. And so basically your pre-legal inspection, your post-legal inspection, and then any additional inspections that are conducted as a result of potential suit, those things should also be accounted for as
Okay,
well.
so we're not talking here about the compliance inspection after I get my DRB approval. We're not saying that somebody's come in and got the DRB approval, and then you all go out and make sure I've finished it complying with DRB. We're not saying we're gonna charge those folks.
Non-compliant DRB inspections. So if the property is not compliant with the DRB decision, that then goes back to legal, and then that would start the process.
Right, got it.
Did you want to add that to the small group that's looking at fees? Or do we want Cam to come back and give us a proposal on those? How do we want to, any thoughts?
I don't mind it being included. It's a no-brainer. Do it.
Are you talking about a standard fee, or are you talking about a fee that would be fixed based on the amount of time taken by the crew that goes out and does the inspection?
I would suggest a standard fee. It's just easier to, across the board, to account for it that way.
You have some idea of what that might be?
The community that I came from started this in 2018, and it was $150. I would assume it would be around that number.
Per inspection?
Per inspection.
Per inspection, correct.
Another incentive to adhere to letters that they get in advance, knowing that.
Notifying them early on that, you know,
Yes.
you
That
could
your
be
fees
subject to
come
this
up.
if you don't.
Yep.
So we good on moving on that? So you're working with the little group and they'll look at that as well. Cam, you'll have something for them. Thank you. Go ahead, Larry.
I just want to remind everyone that we are a complaint-based system. So by charging fees, it's a neighbor complaining about a violation. And so that is going to increase the tension between neighbors even more than it already is, because they were found in violation, have to fix their
Well,
issue.
But the fee doesn't come into effect until they're given a chance to comply, and they don't comply in a timely manner.
That's correct. And generally, those fees would be in addition to any fines that are assessed for non-compliance, so they go hand in hand, essentially.
Okay, Kim, I thought you said once Covenants determines that they're in violation is when the fees begin.
Correct. So
You're
the
saying-
next inspection after Covenants is when that would start. So Covenants happens, they're in violation, they have 30 days to comply. Staff has to go back out to ensure compliance. If they're not compliant, that inspection would be where it would start.
Right. So no matter what, if you're found in non-compliance, you're still getting at least one fee.
Only if you're still in
Right,
non-compliance.
I think it's just the way he's worded it.
Yeah.
So
Okay, we'll
let
hear,
me-
okay,
let me
we'll
try
hear
and
more
rephrase
about
that,
this,
because
folks.
what I'm hearing from you,
10:15.
is they get found guilty, and then they get the chance to make it right. They get one review of making it right. If they've made it right by that first review, there's no additional fee.
Okay,
Beyond
directors, we're moving.
Beyond
Thank you,
that
thank you,
first
Margaret.
review, then they get fees.
Thank you,
We're gonna come
Margaret.
back.
Okay, we'll talk about the fees again, I'm sure, once they come back to us with a little group. Okay, moving on. Larry, keep us moving.
So the next thing I had to were the initial slides that you all had seen, I think, at the June 8th.
Yep.
So I just wanted to remind what we had in here. Just again, the website, I don't know if you want me to go through
No,
these.
no, I think we're all
Just
on board
everybody,
with
anybody
it.
has questions about them?
Did you need any guidance from the board for any of these items? Did you need something for the phone system?
That's going to be brought by Michael through the IT committee.
Okay,
Yeah, so those things are in process. There's
Okay.
additional cybersecurity measures that he's bringing to the IT committee in addition to the phone system.
got it, okay.
So.
So there's nothing here that you want a yes or no? Do we like it? We want to see more from the board? You're,
Just that the board understands that the two staff positions that I had noted, I will have those in draft one, so you can see what the impact, the environmental director position will already be in there as well, as I had stated earlier.
okay.
Those, I know, Bob, you had a couple questions in yours, what's the staffing? So those are the only two that I'm, going to put in the draft, and if y'all tell me to take them out, I take them out.
And when Tom comes back with outsourcing it, we will take away a staff position, potentially?
Yeah, we've given our response, what we found. Dave Primo did a lot of the research on it. At this point, I wouldn't recommend it
Okay,
as far as outsourcing the billing and collections. We put together a report to give to the board.
thank you.
Larry, could you supply a copy of your draft of the job description for the environmental person?
I'll have to send you two, there's an A and a B.
That's fine.
Because there's the big question that I think, I and others, and you all may even want to discuss with Mac as well, with respect to the supervisory responsibilities. And,
I think when Matt
And-
gets here, we'll get a better one with his input in there as well.
yeah, I'd rather him take a look at it. And it's on my list,
Yeah.
because that's obviously, a key position
We
that he will be
we
involved
originally
in.
submitted, that is Doug Britton and I, when we were
Right.
on the Environmental Advisory Committee, submitted a rather detailed proposal for the position some years ago.
Mhm.
And I can probably dig it up and provide that as well.
Yeah, if you want to resend that to me, I'm
Sure.
sure it's probably buried in like my 30,000 emails.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you have it in like 10,000 emails, it might be easier to find.
Well, I think I have it classified. I'll look for it.
Okay, for not going past 10:30, we're going home at 10:30. Let's
So I
keep it
think,
moving.
what else did I have? So
The
these
challenge
were,
scenarios were the ones, did you want to talk about a little bit? Do you want any?
well, that's what
others
these
from
are.
us?
So, the first one was, sort of hitting on,
Basic.
I'm not going to hang on these, but going back, what are some other things, what can we do within the budget? And I'll use the terms that y'all have, the low-hanging fruit. I really feel that what I gave you all at the June work session, that was this is what I think we need. And, so that's why I'm going to put it in draft one, unless I'm instructed not to. Now, the fun stuff, and this is not a comprehensive list, because Laura and her wild staff probably had, how many pages? 19? Yeah, so I took the liberty as acting CEO to not have a list of 19 holy gee whiz things. I didn't want Dave Kerr to lose his mind or something. So we do have a few things listed in here, and again, what I want people to do is, think about these, and if you have an interest in us providing more information, because I think it's a cool idea, whether it's the boat rental on Lake Audubon or, pool cabanas,
So the question, can I ask a question on the Lake Audubon? Why did we pick Audubon versus Lake Thoreau?
Because of the operation out of the boat ramp. Just the boat ramp is already there, the facility, the pool is already there, so there's access to power, water, restrooms.
Okay.
That's primarily why, and it's a popular destination, so what.
And that came from someone at Lake Thoreau. Why don't we have what we have at Lake Anne, at Lake Thoreau, now that they've renovated that waterfront little area? Is that something we can even consider or look at?
We
And
ran
have
a
paddleboards.
boat rental operation at Lake Thoreau.
Okay.
Many years ago, we operated for, I think, 2 or 3 years, and it did really poorly.
Great, but that was before they did the whole revitalization and did that front is really done really well.
That is true, but the overall shape of what is down at the lake, it is really the same. And so while there's some would argue a better vibe, I've heard
Correct.
contrary to that, of what they did, just above that. I don't think it's a dramatic enough change to warrant trying to do it there. I think the Lake Audubon boat ramp is one of the most popular facilities in Reston. From visibility, easy
So as
access.
someone who lives near Lake Thoreau, they do a lot of fun stuff. And those of us who don't live on front of the lake and don't have a boat don't get to go to their fun stuff. So they do fireworks, they do their concerts, they do bands, and they have, Red's Table does things. So if there's something you can just look at or
Yeah,
explore.
we can look at it, and
Explore.
I know somebody on the board for, I think it's Chevy Chase Land that owns it now, so.
Okay.
um,
If we're looking at Audubon, can we look at both together?
Sure.
That was the only
Especially
ask.
with the renovations to the road,
Correct.
it's gonna make access to the lake better.
Right.
And we're spending a lot of money to make access to the lake better.
Any of the other points, any other directors,
Let me
any
just, yeah,
questions, anything
scroll
you
down.
want from us? I love the pool cabanas, someone who doesn't like the sun.
You see here again on D also, this is what Chris talked about, accessibility improvements for North Hills. So I don't know if anybody had questions about any of these others.
The disc and frisbee one, we had it in our questions to the board, and it was not popular at all with any of the directors, so I don't know if that will be one that we want to move on right now, so.
Huh, frisbee golf? Is it a growing thing in any part of the country?
One person was very
There was one person
passionate
who
about
raised
it.
it.
One person, excuse me, thank you. One person came and made a presentation to PrAC, and we asked them to go see if there was a substantial amount of support for that within the community. And while there was a lot of support for it outside the community, there wasn't a
No one
whole lot of
in
support
Reston.
for it within the community. So I don't know, I'd have to go back and talk to the committee, but I don't know that, I'm not confident that PrAC is interested in pursuing that a whole lot more.
Okay.
It is growing, but not nearly.
Nothing's like pickleball.
True. So I don't know if anybody had any other questions about any of these items?
The director, do we want to see any of the others, like I and J? Is that something we want them to come back with more numbers? Because I know there was a possible revenue with J, but what kind of numbers are we talking about? Does it justify spending that?
I don't see the revenue on J.
Did we, when he talked to Walter, were we talking about we could leverage it with the county or, no?
I think that's a really tough.
Okay.
Yeah, because VDOT controls the roads.
Yeah.
And this, I just hear from the cyclists that, they have and Ken, he rides all the time, riding in the bike lanes down on Lawyers and Soapstone, there's crap in the bike lane all the time.
Yeah.
So, but then we're suggesting we spend about $250,000, but we're cleaning VDOT streets.
Mike Mack gave me this suggestion. He said, look, we already do the mowing, we make the roads look good, but they still look like crud, in part because of this, because of the stuff that's in the road, particularly after storms. Because, the tires don't knock it out of the bike lanes, because people aren't riding in the bike lanes. Anyways, I'm not wed to it, trust me. It's a lot of cash.
For me, if there was a revenue, yes, if not, no. No, so
But this is something where, you know, the larger discussion about where RA's helping in the public realm, where it could come in. It's just, this isn't something we're currently doing,
Okay.
as opposed to
Care
like,
for-
yeah,
we
as
could be
opposed to
doing.
like, you know, plowing the pathways and, you know, those kinds of things that everybody benefits from.
Any other questions you need from us? And I know, Sam, you didn't have an opportunity to submit any of these because you joined later. Is there anything HR would like from the board? Do you want us to support?
Oh, I have a list, but it probably best that I give it to her. I guess on the scrap.
Yeah, and that she and I have a chance to talk about it.
Perfect.
And in 4 days, Mac.
Yes.
I'd like to make a suggestion
Sure.
because a lot of the things we've been talking about tonight are great things for the community that would give a positive impact to the community. But I still am extremely worried that we approved a 2023 budget last year, which was basically a bare bones budget, because we look at it every year, where the assessment rate was $815 versus our current assessment rate of $740. That's already a 10% increase. So I'd like to make a suggestion that we take and potentially ask staff to make a budget in which this is what we need, right, to operate and keep the status quo of what RA continues to do today, and present all of the additions and potential subtractions to the assessment as that. If you want to do X, you're going to add $3, to the assessment. If you want to do Y, you're going to subtract $3 from the assessment. And that way, as we make decisions, we're deciding whether to increase or decrease our assessment rates. Because I'm not sure we have any wiggle room unless anybody's willing to say they want to increase our assessment rates beyond the 10% we already have to do a lot of fun projects next year. And I haven't heard a whole lot of cutting the budget or increasing the revenue substantially in some other way during this meeting. And so this is the type of discussion you would normally have in June, say, so that you have a couple months to work on it. But we're in August. Larry's team needs to develop a budget at this point. And I really think at this point that might be the best way for us to examine a 2023 budget.
Okay, Larry, do you need anything else from us?
No, I got one comment on that after Dave talks.
Just along those lines, the last fiscal committee meeting, there were a few discussions about items that had to do with cost and operating expense. One was whether or not to impose a credit card surcharge on members who pay their assessments. It has come up before in RA. It has been approved by the board. It never got implemented. Okay. I think that annual number is creeping closer to $200,000 a year that we pay for people to have that luxury. I know there are people who are against it. I understand their position, but every one of those people also pay a property tax to the Fairfax County. If they pay credit card there, they should pay credit card here because our fee will be much less than they pay for the property taxes. Anyway, it ought to be looked at, okay?
Thank you.
Another is Friends of Reston. We talked about this just very briefly at the last meeting. They have, for whatever reason, a large amount of funds, and Fiscal didn't know why, and maybe it's not ours to know why, but we ought to at least be aware of what's out there. I think it's it's a big number. And the third thing is really kind of a people question is, can positions be filled with full-time, part-time people? Are there positions in RA that need to get done every single day, okay, that you can get done with somebody who works 5 hours a day, every single day. You know, if there's positions like that, and as positions become available, you don't take people out of your organization, put people in, you say, some opening comes up, yeah, can we fill that with someone?
Part-time.
You can put 2 people in at 5 hours a week and save a lot of money on an annual basis. So just as a kind of more of a strategy of how you staff, okay, it might be a way to save funds in the future. So those are some topics that Fiscal brought up last meeting.
And we even talked about interns at one point, I think, to see if they can help.
Yeah, I mean, this concept too is also more of a full-time, part-time, meaning it's someone who comes in and works for you for 20 years if they want to. I mean, but they may not, but there's a lot of resources in
That's a good
Reston.
idea. Yeah.
There are a lot of stay-at-home parents.
Yeah.
Okay, that would love to have a part-time
Part-time
job.
work.
That probably have better degrees than
Yes.
many of us have.
Any thoughts, since we have all of your SLT here, staff, how do you feel about having part-timers, full-timers? Is that something you can explore and come back?
We can certainly explore it. You know, some of the changes we've made over the last 5 to 7 years is we had seasonals, and then we lost them because they went to higher paying jobs, and the only way we could actually retain skilled people, we reduced our seasonal burden and converted some of those to full-time.
Year-round.
So, you know, it's a tough sell. And, you know, the comment was made earlier, or maybe it was in Bob's presentation, you know, we have a lot of very specific jobs, whether it's, you know, an arborist or, you know, what Austin was doing prior, you know, how do you, working on pools and stuff. And most of those things, you can't attract part-time people. You cannot use interns. You know, you got to have the skill set, you got to be able to do it. I would love to have more part-time people that you didn't have to pay all the benefits to. The problem is you can't attract them. In this market, people want full-time, they want the benefits, they want health insurance, whatever. That's why we went to switching a lot of those positions to full-time in the first place, you know, over the course of a few years, because we couldn't get qualified seasonals, period. So, I mean, I'm happy to look at it, and, you know, every department's a little bit different in that because of the various, you know, whether it's programming or maintenance or whatever, but it's a tough thing to get the work done relying on that. I'm giving you my opinion. And then just one comment I want to make, because I know we're right at 10:30, shoot, we're over, had to do with Jennifer's thing. So if you recall the past couple of budgets that I've been very involved with, so this past year and then in 2018, we did have a list. So later on in the budget process, when it's probably October, I actually had a list of, here is what's been added, you know, whether it's a revenue source or an expense for whatever reason, you know, what that priority was and what was the assessment impact of that very specific act, you know, or inclusion. So typically we've done that later in the process. I'm happy to kind of start that list now, or, you know, commencing with the things that we've already talked about. So if that'll help, so that as you talk about these things, and you saw the one on Laura's slide, if you want to cover the member passes, okay, add $20 to the assessment and we'll do it. So I'm happy to, you know, keep that running list as we go through these discussions.
Any questions? Anything from staff?
I would support that this round, that you make a budget of this is what we need. I mean, I would consider inflation something that is a known factor. That is something that we're going to face. And, you know, we need, you know, to factor those things into our bare bones budget. But anything that is above that, a decision is made based on a list.
So
because the last thing
We
that
agree.
I want,
I think we all agree, Jen. Can I make a motion to adjourn?
I just have one question. I just wanted to talk staff if they had any questions for us.
one more thing I'd like to see added. Larry, you and I have exchanged emails on land use issues and the staffing that might be needed for that, and I'd like to see that as an option.
Bringing back like a planner or something?
Some, yeah, part-time, whatever you think is necessary.
Well, we
Because
have
land
been
use issues are ramping back up in Reston, and I'm not sure that we have the capacity anymore to keep up with them.
So, one of the final questions on the last item summary, does the CEO or acting CEO have what he needs? Bob, you raised the questions that has been talked about at Fiscal. Give us an inflation number, because that's a huge impact. I mean, if you don't give us one, what we'll do, we're going to look at, what we spend on oil, electricity, use a factor of X. We'll look at, chlorine and other, chemicals and things like that and factor that in. But there are other things that have an impact on, from inflation as well. And so right now, and to go, I think, Tom, from the 22 to 23, we just 3%, right? We just basically straight lined almost everything at 3%. So, and that's not high enough.
No.
No, it's not.
I'm in support of Bob working with staff to determine inflation on any items they need inflation.
Thank you,
Jennifer, I
Jen.
think we were just trying to say, we'd like to hear what staff would come up with yours, and I know there's different factors, and then work with the treasurer on it, come back to the board.
Because, if everything else remains equal, okay, so this, Jennifer, this kind of goes to your point, you were talking about a baseline budget. So is the baseline budget, you're thinking about the one where I add the 2 staff that I have recommended, or is it not? And do we add the additional cybersecurity and migrating to the phone system, or do we not? Because if I'm, without that kind of guidance, I'm going to put together draft 1 that's going to be basically what we have now with those additions that I've already discussed and presented at prior meetings, including, inflation factors, and then have a list of all the other things with the assessment impact on those.
I would say, for example, with the phone system, the present phone system is not supported any longer. It needs to be replaced, and this is what it's going to cost us. Bang. That's
right, but is that included in the base?
Damn. Yeah,
Yes.
straight away.
Okay.
Straight
Yeah,
away.
okay.
Anything that
If it's required, but positions are, I think that you've given us some reason to add them, but those are options. Inflation is required, but boat rental operations at Lake Audubon is optional.
No, I think we agree. I'm sure we agree with that, Jen.
Of course we do.
I would say that if we used as a baseline the staff recommendations that were produced in June, we at least have a basis on which to make refinements. And then as we identify material changes that will either substantially keep costs at a manageable level or increase revenues, they should be included and justified. So just to say, we're going to, for example, the cabanas, we would just put that in? No, it would have to be, we're doing it for this reason, as opposed to just saying, well, it's a nice
And Bob,
idea.
I would disagree, because staff recommendations, member recommendations, board recommendations are all recommendations. What I'm asking for is, what do we need to keep status quo of how we operated in 2022? That's our baseline. Everything else is recommendations that we need to evaluate equally.
We could do that, Tom, right? We could do that pretty damn quickly. Yeah, we could, let
So
me
do we
work
wanna-
with Tom, and we'll produce a baseline budget and identify the differences, because Tom's provided enough information that we can go through and impose inflation factors on the various categories and then assumptions about additional costs or changes in costs for personnel and so on. you can do that. And that will follow through to what the capital budget is, which will then in turn generate what the assessment has to be in order to accomplish that.
Okay, we said 10:30, we went out.
No, happy to do
Yeah.
that, Jen.
Okay.
One from staff, or how do you want, I mean, since we want to go home, what are we going to do?
I think we'll continue this conversation when you bring draft one. And,
I suspect there'll be some conversation.
There'll be plenty.
yeah.
So, but we do, of course, want to hear more from staff if you've got budgetary recommendations. So you know how to find us, you know how to find Larry, and we would love to hear from you. 'cause
And
you-
is there anybody here in staff who feels like it's okay, let's raise the assessment? We do, and you know there are layoffs that are already starting, like Google and others are laying off. We're going into a tough economy, so please just absolutely keep that in mind. And if there are creative ways that we can pull cabanas, okay, we can't fund it with assessment, can we get sponsors? Can we get, I don't know, dental, is it the dental guys who do the movies all the time? Can we put their logo on? Like, come up with creative ideas so we can give members what they want without, going overboard.
My law firm will put the ad on all.
There you go. We've got a sponsor right here for your cabanas. Thank you so much for staying so late. Any last thoughts? No? Okay.
Well, we could go on for
We are adjourned.
many more hours.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.